A poor girl sat at the wrong table on a blind date. She had no idea he was the new CEO of her company. What he did next left her speechless. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Lucy Mitchell gripped the metal pole of the crowded Chicago L train, her gaze darting from the illuminated station signs to the small wristwatch she'd inherited from her late grandmother. Rain drummed against the windows, and the cold wind outside made the dimly lit streets look even more foreboding. She was already half an hour behind schedule, and the thought of arriving late to a blind date arranged by her best friend gave her a deep pang of anxiety. She was 35, though she often felt older, given the responsibilities she carried. Her sister Emily, 7 years younger, had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder that demanded costly treatments and constant medical attention. Lucy's life revolved around hospital visits, pharmacy receipts, and insurance claims. She worked full-time as an administrative assistant at Harrington Tech, one of Chicago's fast-growing technology firms, and on many weekends, she picked up shifts at a small cafe just to make ends meet. She hardly had time to breathe, let alone date. Yet here she was, racing against the clock because Cynthia Lee, her best friend since college, had insisted she meet a seemingly nice accountant named Mike. "He's stable, kind, and single," Cynthia had teased. "Exactly what you need." Lucy had hesitated at first. Blind dates often felt like forced encounters, but she also recognized the emptiness creeping into her life, and perhaps the possibility of meeting someone decent appealed to the part of her that still hoped for a bit of companionship. As the train approached her stop, she tugged her old coat around her shoulders and glanced at her reflection in the window. Dark brown hair spilled just below her shoulders in loose curls, and her hazel eyes carried the faintest hint of exhaustion. Lucy rarely had the time or spare money to indulge in fancy beauty routines. She couldn't help but wonder if that made her look out of place at a high-end restaurant. Still, Cynthia had assured her that Mike would appreciate her straightforward, no-frills demeanor. When the train finally screeched to a halt, Lucy hurried onto the wet platform and made her way down the stairs, weaving through the bustling crowd. Rain assaulted her small umbrella, a flimsy contraption that threatened to flip inside out with every gust of wind. She silently cursed the weather as she spotted the bright letters of La Belle Fontaine, the upscale French restaurant Cynthia had recommended. Its golden lights spilled onto the sidewalk, offering a brief respite from the grim atmosphere outside. Inside, the restaurant was warm and elegant, with soft piano music and the faint clink of silverware against fine china. The maitre d' stood behind a polished podium, his nose slightly upturned in a posture of formal courtesy. Lucy approached, fumbling for her phone to check her messages. She saw one from Cynthia. Mike's already there. "Good luck!" Clearing her throat, she gave the maitre d' her name, but he seemed puzzled at first. Over the hum of conversation, Lucy thought she heard him say something about Harrison. Yet the dining area was loud enough that she couldn't catch every word. She muttered an apology for her lateness. The maitre d' nodded, gestured toward the far end of the room, and led her through the maze of linen-covered tables. Her heart thumped against her ribcage. She hated feeling out of place, especially among patrons sipping wine she could never afford. At last, she spotted a man sitting alone with a glass of water, seemingly waiting for someone. His back was partially turned, but the maitre d' insisted this was the right table. Determined to make a decent first impression, Lucy tugged at the collar of her coat and approached with a nervous smile. "Mike?" she asked, feeling her cheeks warm under the ambient lighting. The man turned, revealing an angled jawline and dark, neatly combed hair. He appeared surprised for a fraction of a second, his deep blue eyes flickering with intrigue. Instead of correcting her, he invited her to sit, pulling out a chair with careful courtesy. "I'm Glad you made it, he said after a moment, giving her a small grin. The confusion in his gaze was subtle, but Lucy was too focused on her own nerves to notice. She sank into the chair, forcing a shaky exhale, convinced this was indeed the elusive accountant. He introduced himself as Liam, though her own anxiety distorted the moment. The noise of the restaurant and her own pounding heart made her mishear, or perhaps he just mumbled. Lucy quickly assumed she had the right man. Relieved, she offered a shy chuckle. "I'm sorry I'm so late," she began, pushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "The train was delayed and, well, I hope you haven't been waiting too long." He shook his head. "Not at all," he replied smoothly, clearing his throat as if deciding what to say next. Lucy felt a small thrill settle into her stomach. There was something comforting about his voice, a warmth she wasn't expecting from a formal date. She couldn't help noticing the refined way he carried himself, an elegant suit, well-polished shoes. Maybe accountants who worked with high-net-worth clients dressed like that. She brushed aside the thought. Whatever the case, he seemed kind, and she was desperate for a moment of reprieve from her usual anxieties. And so began a night she would never forget. Lucy perched uncomfortably on the edge of her chair, feeling the starched linen beneath her fingertips. She noticed how his gaze softened whenever she spoke. She couldn't exactly pinpoint why, but she sensed a quiet curiosity in him. It was different from the forced politeness she often encountered on dates, especially blind ones. "So, Mike, sorry if it sounds too direct," Lucy said, attempting a casual tone. "But Cynthia told me you're an accountant. Do you have your own practice, or do you work for a firm?" She paused, glancing around at the opulent decor. "You must do quite well to suggest a place like this." He gave a slight chuckle, seeming to weigh his words. "I suppose you could say I work for a firm," he replied. "Though I wasn't the one who picked the restaurant. I'm staying at a hotel nearby, and someone recommended it. Truth is, I'm not that familiar with the city's dining scene." Lucy nodded, relieved that her assumption made sense. The conversation drifted to safer territory, why she'd come to Chicago, how she landed a job at Harrington Tech. She tried to keep it simple. A scholarship that didn't pan out, family obligations that kept her in the city, the stable, if somewhat unremarkable, position as an administrative assistant. She didn't mention Emily's illness. Not yet. That topic required a certain level of trust, and Lucy was still trying to figure out if the man across from her was the right person to confide in. He, in turn, was attentive, prodding gently for more details about her life. Each question felt like a small doorway into deeper conversation. He didn't interrupt or feign disinterest. When Lucy mentioned the responsibility she felt towards her family, she saw empathy flicker in his eyes, hinting at a sensitivity she rarely encountered. At one point, the waiter arrived to take their orders. Lucy glanced at the menu, almost wincing at the prices. Everything seemed far more expensive than what she could normally afford. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but he calmly suggested she pick whatever she liked and reassured her not to worry. Despite his courtesy, Lucy ordered something modest, a simple chicken dish without elaborate sauces. He studied the menu with a slight frown before choosing seared salmon. The exchange was quick, but she noticed how he spoke to the waiter. Cordial, but with an assured air that most people only dreamed of. There was a subtle authority in his demeanor, something that made her wonder if he really was just an ordinary accountant. They resumed their conversation, discussing childhood memories, books they'd loved as teenagers, and places they hoped to visit one day. The more Lucy talked, the more she forgot about the stress of her everyday life. He listened so intently, occasionally smiling at her jokes or asking follow-up questions about her opinions. She found herself laughing more than she had in months. "How did you and Cynthia meet?" he asked at one point, leaning slightly forward, elbows resting on the table. The candlelight caught the intensity of his gaze. "We were roommates in college," Lucy explained, taking a small sip of water. "Back when I still thought I'd go into marketing, things changed pretty drastically when my sister got sick. I had to start working full-time, so I dropped out and, well, here I am." She let out a self-deprecating laugh, then waved her hand. "Anyway, Cynthia's been my rock. If not for her, I probably wouldn't be out tonight. She's always encouraging me to live a little, I guess." He studied her face for a moment. "You don't regret leaving school?" She shrugged, carefully choosing her words. "Some days, I do, but Emily needed me. She still does. I'd rather be there for her than regret not helping. Besides, it's not too late, right? I could go back one day if life calms down." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's admirable," he said quietly. "Family is important." Before Lucy could respond, their meals arrived, filling the space with the aroma of roasted herbs and buttery sauces. They exchanged appreciative glances, momentarily enthralled by the promise of a good meal. As the restaurant's chatter continued around them, Lucy glanced at her companion's hands. Even his hands seemed graceful, like those of someone used to high-stakes negotiations. It crossed her mind again. Was he really just an accountant? But the question slipped away beneath the warmth of conversation. For the first time in a long while, Lucy felt relaxed, almost safe. The clinking of cutlery and the low hum of conversation formed a cocoon of normalcy, even though this whole setup was anything but normal. It struck her that she had stumbled into a moment she desperately needed, a breath of air in a life that had become stifling. In that soft glow of candlelight, Lucy allowed herself a small hope that maybe she deserved a good memory, despite her chaotic world. She felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of curiosity and unease, because something about this Mike wasn't adding up. Yet, she found herself wanting to linger in his company just a little longer. The meal went by more smoothly than Lucy could have predicted. She found it surprisingly easy to open up about her daily routines, her modest dreams, and even the lighter anecdotes of growing up in a small Illinois town. The conversation flowed like a steady river, yet a voice in the back of her mind kept urging her to be cautious. She'd been hurt before by men who promised one thing and delivered another. As they polished off their entrees, Lucy excused herself to the restroom. Walking past the rows of elegantly dressed diners, she felt a twinge of self-consciousness. Her plain black dress and worn-out heels stood in stark contrast to the couture gowns and polished designer shoes around her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in a place like this, a high-end restaurant that likely catered to the city's elite. In the restroom, she splashed cool water on her hands and stared at her reflection in the mirror. A faint flicker of doubt crossed her features. Maybe it wasn't just the extravagance of the setting that unsettled her. It was the unspoken fear that this man, so calm and captivating, might be too good to be true. She reminded herself to keep her guard up, to remember that she was here because of a blind date gone awry, and she still wasn't entirely certain she was seated with the right person. Her thoughts briefly wandered to her sister, Emily. Lucy's chest tightened. Emily's health had stabilized over the last few months, but the costs of her treatments remained a heavy burden. Lucy recalled sleepless nights, working overtime and anxiously reading online forums about the best specialists. She had made so many sacrifices. Part of her wanted to embrace the chance for something uplifting tonight. Still, a sliver of guilt poked at her, as though she shouldn't allow herself to relax when her sister needed so much care. When Lucy returned to the table, her dinner companion looked up and smiled, a quiet warmth in his expression. For a moment, the tension in her chest eased. That pang of guilt retreated just a little. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently, noticing her subdued demeanor. She forced a small grin. "Yeah, just thinking about home," she admitted, settling back into her seat. He nodded, his gaze flickering with sympathy. "I can relate. I've got my own share of responsibilities that weigh on me." His response made her curious, but he didn't offer further details. Instead, he asked if she wanted dessert, and Lucy found herself laughing softly. "I'd love to," she said, "but these prices are making me sweat." He offered a reassuring grin. "It's on me, don't worry," he replied, gesturing to the waiter. She didn't insist. Normally, Lucy would split the bill, but her budget was too tight to refuse a small kindness. The shared chocolate mousse arrived with a flourish, the waiter placing it carefully in the center of the table. They traded compliments about how delicious it looked, and for a few light-hearted minutes, they teased each other about who would take the bigger spoonful. Between sweet bites, Lucy felt a subtle warmth extend from him, a tangible presence that was comforting in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She tried to push aside her lingering suspicions, choosing instead to savor the moment. She felt, for once, like a regular person on a normal date. Yet, as their plates were cleared and the check discreetly delivered, Lucy's anxiety flared again. She recalled the times she'd nearly trusted someone only to discover hidden agendas or half-truths. Her thoughts spiraled. Could this man be hiding something? She decided to voice at least a fraction of her unease. "I'm sorry if this sounds strange," she began, fiddling with her napkin, "but you seem different than I expected. I mean, Cynthia said you were nice, but you come off more refined. I know we just met, but is there anything else I should know about you?" He regarded her with a calm expression, as though he was choosing his words carefully. "Well, He paused, the corners of his mouth tensing slightly. "I'm not from here, not originally. I've been traveling a lot lately because of work. I guess that might explain why I feel a bit out of place too." Lucy nodded slowly. It wasn't exactly a revealing answer, but it was enough to calm the tension in the air. She reminded herself that they were still practically strangers. Maybe she expected too much too soon. After settling the check, he stood and offered her his arm. She felt a delicate flutter in her stomach as she slipped her hand around his elbow. Outside, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, the streetlights reflecting off puddles that dotted the sidewalk. He raised a hand to hail a taxi, the city's nighttime bustle providing a subdued backdrop. Lucy inhaled, the cool air filling her lungs. Despite her lingering uncertainties, she sensed that the evening had cracked open a door she'd long since locked. With one last look at his thoughtful eyes, she felt the echo of her past caution, but also the faint promise of hope. They stepped onto the sidewalk, and the contrast between the restaurant's warm glow and the chilly Chicago drizzle brought Lucy back to reality. She realized that a taxi would soon whisk her away, leaving a swirl of new questions in her mind. What exactly had happened tonight? Where was this connection leading? He kept a steady hand on her elbow to guide her around a wide puddle. "Let's wait under the awning," he suggested, pulling out his phone to check something. For a moment, she caught sight of a sophisticated screen layout, some kind of financial chart. Before she could observe more, he tucked the phone away. She tried to quell her rising curiosity. "I guess I shouldn't complain about the rain," she said, glancing at him. "It's been a dry season, so we need it." He nodded, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. "Chicago weather is unpredictable, but I have to say, it's nicer here than in some of the places I've traveled recently." He offered that small hint about his lifestyle, then dropped it. They stood side by side, listening to the distant honks of cars and the occasional whoosh of tires through puddles. The conversation had temporarily lapsed, replaced by a mild tension. Lucy sensed that the evening's magic was wearing off, replaced by the stark truth that they were two people who barely knew each other. A wave of guilt rose in her chest again. She glanced at her watch. Emily would be waiting. "I should probably get home," Lucy said softly, her breath clouding in the night air. "My sister's expecting me." He regarded her with a thoughtful expression, seeming about to ask a question. Perhaps he wanted to know more about her family, or why she looked so worried. But as a taxi pulled up to the curb, the moment for deeper inquiries vanished. He opened the door and motioned for her to slide inside. She hesitated. "Thank you for tonight," she murmured, feeling a sudden rush of gratitude. "You were easy to talk to." His serious expression softened, and he offered a small smile. "Likewise, I hope we can do this again." His words echoed in her ears as she lowered herself onto the worn leather seat. Could she really open herself to another meeting? She recalled the looming medical bills, her overstuffed schedule, and the precarious state of her job. Yet a small part of her, maybe the part that was tired of carrying the entire world, hoped they'd meet again. She gave him her phone number, scribbled hastily on a corner of a restaurant receipt she found in her purse. He tucked it into his jacket pocket as though it were a delicate treasure. Then, with a gentle farewell, he closed the taxi door. The driver asked for her destination, and Lucy offered the address of the modest apartment she shared with Emily. Glancing back, Lucy saw him standing on the curb, watching as the taxi merged into the flow of traffic. His figure blurred behind raindrops clinging to the window, and she felt a twinge of something she couldn't quite name. Loss, maybe, or the fear of having revealed too much of herself. But it was also an odd sense of relief. She had spent an evening talking, laughing, and forgetting her burdens for just a while. During the ride home, her mind raced. She touched the screen of her phone to check for messages. Sure enough, there were 2 from Cynthia, both exclaiming excitement. Lucy quickly typed a reply. "It went unexpectedly well. Let's talk tomorrow." She stared at the city lights passing outside, letting the hum of the taxi lull her. The more she thought about him, the more she wondered if she'd ever see him again. The pang of regret in her chest suggested she wanted to, yet a flicker of intuition told her there was more to him than he'd revealed. She reminded herself to stay cautious. After all, she hardly knew his real story. When the taxi stopped in front of her building, a simple 3-story walk-up with peeling paint, she realized how different her world was from the one she'd glimpsed tonight. She paid the fare with a heavy sigh, thinking of the stack of unpaid bills on her desk. The moment she stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the warmth of possibility that had briefly enveloped her began to fade under the fluorescent glare. Emily's room was dark, her breathing faintly audible through the slightly open door. Lucy toed off her shoes as quietly as possible, then slipped into her own room. She flicked on the small lamp beside her bed, revealing a modest space cluttered with textbooks she no longer used, and receipts she had yet to file. She lowered herself onto the worn quilt, feeling the weight of responsibility returning. She thought about the stranger from tonight, so composed, so inquisitive, and oddly comforting. She recalled the way his eyes lit up when she spoke. Every detail seemed to reinforce a lingering suspicion that the night had been more than just a blind date. Lucy wanted to dismiss the notion, to remind herself that life rarely offered such neat coincidences. But she couldn't help remembering how gently he had offered his arm and how sincere his interest in her life seemed. She exhaled, closing her eyes in an attempt to relax. Sleep wouldn't come easily, she knew. Her mind whirled with questions about him, about the truths he hadn't shared, and about the pang in her own heart that whispered she might be on the edge of something she wasn't entirely ready for. Morning light crept through the threadbare curtains, casting faint patterns on Lucy's bedroom floor. She woke with a start, the memory of the previous night flooding her mind. She stared at the ceiling for a few moments, replaying each moment, the awkward beginning, the conversation that flowed so effortlessly, and the strange sense that she'd stepped into a story far more complicated than a simple blind date. A knock on her door pulled her from those thoughts. Emily poked her head in. Dark circles under Emily's eyes betrayed a restless night. "Morning," her sister said, voice subdued. "You got home late." "Everything okay?" Lucy forced a reassuring smile, motioning for Emily to sit on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, it was interesting," she replied, trying to sound casual. She didn't want to pile any unnecessary worry on her sister. "I'll fill you in later. More importantly, how are you feeling?" Emily offered a half shrug. "The pain meds help, but I hate feeling so dependent on them. And the new round of tests is coming up next week." She pressed her lips together, concern evident in her expression. "We'll figure it out, right?" Lucy leaned forward, placing a comforting hand over Emily's. "Always, I promise." After Emily left, Lucy dressed quickly for work, choosing a simple blouse and slacks. She felt a knot in her stomach. Work meant facing the usual demands of her boss and colleagues at Harrington Tech. She also wondered if she might see Mike again, or was that just a fleeting encounter, something that wouldn't survive the harsh daylight of real life? At the office, she immediately dove into her tasks, sorting through schedules and responding to emails. Her cubicle was cramped, lined with motivational quotes and a few photos of Emily. It was a quiet corner of an otherwise bustling building. Co-workers brushed by, greeting Lucy with polite nods. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting to the man from last night. During her lunch break, she grabbed a quick salad from the cafeteria, then ducked into a small meeting room to call Cynthia. "Hey, I've been dying to hear." Cynthia's voice chirped through the phone. "How was it with Mike? Is he everything I said he'd be?" Lucy hesitated, picking at the edges of the plastic container. "Well, it was good, but there's something off. He didn't exactly seem like an accountant. Maybe I'm overthinking it." On the other end, Cynthia laughed. "Lucy, not every accountant fits the boring stereotype. What if he's just polished? Maybe he deals with big-time clients." Lucy exhaled. "You're probably right." She didn't want to sound paranoid, so she mentioned the conversation's smooth flow and how kind he was. She left out the subtle dissonance she felt, worried Cynthia would label her as too cynical. They wrapped up the call with Cynthia, promising to track down the original Mike's phone number again, just in case Lucy wanted to confirm any details. The rest of the afternoon blurred as Lucy tackled spreadsheets and filed documentation. She was about to pack up for the day when her manager, Martin, asked for a last-minute favor. "We need an updated list of all staff members in the research and development team," he said in a rushed tone, handing her a thick folder. "The new CEO is coming Monday, and we need everything in order." Lucy blinked. She'd heard chatter of a leadership change but hadn't paid much attention. The previous CEO had stepped down under unclear circumstances, something about health issues and a changing industry. She flipped through the pages, trying to recall the name of the incoming executive. "Liam Harrison," Martin supplied before Lucy could ask. "Big shot from out east, rumored to be a billionaire." "The board's quite excited." Lucy felt her stomach twist. She forced a neutral expression, but the timing of everything rattled her. Monday was just around the corner, and the name Liam, didn't her date mention that briefly? Or maybe she misheard. She tried to dismiss the thought. There had to be plenty of Liams in the world, and the idea that the man she had met was somehow connected to Harrington Tech felt too far-fetched. She worked late into the evening, triple-checking the R&D roster and cross-referencing job titles with updated employee statuses. By the time she left the building, the sky was dark, the city's neon lights painting the streets in a rainbow glow. She caught her reflection in the glass doors, a tired woman wearing stress like a heavy cloak. Yet behind that fatigue, she recognized a flicker of something else, an eagerness for a life beyond endless obligations. She hopped on the train, finding a seat near the door. As the city blurred outside, Lucy replayed the day's events, her conversation with Cynthia, the suspicious coincidence of hearing Liam's name in connection to her company, the gnawing memory of a quiet smile across a candle-lit table. She allowed herself a small, private thrill. Maybe change was coming, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready for it. Though doubt shadowed every hopeful thought, Lucy clutched her purse as the train rattled over the tracks, her heart wavering between excitement and dread. She told herself it was probably all just a cosmic joke, but at the same time, part of her couldn't ignore that the door to something bigger had cracked open, and she couldn't quite resist the pull to see what lay on the other side. Lucy stepped off the elevator on Monday morning, her nerves tighter than a drawn bow. The usually familiar halls of Harrington Tech seemed tense, like everyone held their breath in anticipation. She clutched the folder containing the updated R&D roster and made her way toward her cubicle. She already knew that by noon, the company's new CEO, Liam Harrison, would arrive to meet various teams and assess how smoothly he could implement his leadership style. At her desk, Lucy spotted a white envelope propped against her keyboard. It contained a formal invitation to a departmental meet and greet with the incoming CEO. Her heart thumped at the possibility that the man she'd had dinner with, the man she called Mike, might be the very same Liam Harrison. It felt too bizarre to be real, but she couldn't ignore the suspicion burning in her mind. She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't notice someone approach. A gentle voice pulled her out of her reverie. "Morning, Lucy," said Esther Collins, 50, the senior HR manager who exuded a motherly warmth. Esther was short and sturdy, with neatly styled silvering hair and kind eyes that always seemed to observe more than they let on. She noticed Lucy holding the invitation with trembling fingers. "Everything all right?" Esther asked, leaning on the low wall of Lucy's cubicle. Lucy offered an unconvincing nod. She instinctively trusted Esther, who had a reputation for giving sound advice. There was a protective aura around Esther that made people seek her counsel. She had guided more than a few anxious employees through tough transitions. Lucy exhaled slowly, sensing the tension she'd been carrying since Friday. I'm just nervous about meeting the new CEO, that's all." It was partly true, though she left out the part about possibly having dined with him days earlier under a false assumption. Esther studied her face for a moment, then invited her to a quieter corner near the HR offices. "Let's step into my office for a minute. I'd like to talk before all the hustle starts." Lucy followed, grateful for the chance to gather herself. Esther's office was small but welcoming, decorated with family photos and knickknacks from employee recognition events. The older woman closed the door and motioned for Lucy to sit on a cushioned chair by a round table, rather than the stiff chair facing the desk. It felt more personal, less formal. "You've been here long enough for me to see you're a hard worker, Lucy," Esther began, her tone gentle yet firm. "I know big changes can spark all kinds of worries, but I think Mr. Harrison might bring some fresh air to Harrington Tech. Rumor has it he's got a vision for the future and won't just shake things up for the sake of it. He's too shrewd for that." Lucy nodded, trying to keep her face neutral. "I've heard the same rumors, but it still makes me uneasy. I rely on this job to support my sister. If anything changes for the worse, She paused, swallowing her fears. She didn't want to overshare, but Esther's empathetic gaze prompted honesty. Esther's expression softened with concern. "Look, Lucy, if it helps, I've worked under 5 CEOs in this company over the years. Some were more approachable than others. Change is inevitable in corporate life, but you have value here. Don't forget that. And if you ever feel cornered or unsure, I'm here. My door is always open." For a moment, Lucy felt a surge of relief. She realized Esther was more than an HR manager. She was a mentor, someone who genuinely cared about employees as human beings. Lucy confided that she worried about reorganization, about potential layoffs, or shifting departments. Esther listened, occasionally nodding, then offered comforting words about how Lucy's consistent performance made her a prime candidate for retaining her position. Before Lucy left, Esther gently laid a hand on her arm. "Be confident. You're competent and dedicated, attributes any smart CEO would appreciate." Encouraged by Esther's kindness, Lucy went to prepare for the day's big meeting. She placed the R&D folder on her desk and carefully laid out a copy of each document. Her heart fluttered when she recalled that distinctive name, Liam Harrison. She didn't know what she'd do if he turned out to be the same man from Friday. Yet, a part of her clung to the small chance she was just overreacting. As the clock approached noon, Lucy joined a cluster of employees gathering in the company's main conference area. Long tables bore coffee, pastries, and fruit trays, a mild attempt to create a warm reception for the new boss. The chatter was subdued, but charged with excitement. Lucy positioned herself near the back, hoping to keep a low profile. She looked around, noticing managers fidgeting with tie knots and smoothing skirts. A hush fell when Martin, her direct manager, stepped to the front and signaled everyone to quiet down. Lucy's breath caught in her throat the moment she saw him. Tall, well-built, dark hair neatly combed, the same piercing gaze she remembered in the candlelight at the restaurant. He stood confidently beside Martin, scanning the faces in the room with an air of polite authority. Her pulse slammed in her ears as his gaze locked onto hers for a split second. She felt a jolt like a wave of electricity passing through her. He was Liam Harrison, and he was definitely the man she'd met under false pretenses. Liam Harrison held the room's attention from the moment he began speaking. His voice was calm, projecting both confidence and an undercurrent of warmth. Lucy found herself torn between wanting to hide behind her colleagues and an inexplicable urge to confront him. Even though they'd shared an unexpectedly genuine evening, she now grappled with the question, why hadn't he told her who he really was? She listened to his introduction, the standard lines about being excited to lead Harrington Tech, his plans to navigate evolving markets, and how he valued teamwork. Her mind buzzed with conflicting emotions. She tried to focus on his words, rather than the memory of laughing with him over a shared dessert, or the feeling of his arm lightly guiding her through the rain. Her manager, Martin, then stepped up to invite employees to greet their new CEO individually. Immediately, a line formed. Lucy stayed back, practically rooted in place, while employees from R&D, marketing, and finance approached Liam, offering polite handshakes and measured smiles. He responded to each person with courteous interest, occasionally making notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. Lucy's palms began to sweat. This was her final moment of hesitation. Did she walk right up and address him, or duck out and pretend she was just another employee until they could speak privately? She decided she couldn't flee forever. Her heart pounded as she approached the line. One by one, the line thinned until there were only a couple of people ahead of her. She dared a glance in his direction. His eyes flickered toward her and then shifted to the next employee. She wondered if he wanted to speak to her in private as much as she did. The tension left her stomach in knots. When it was finally her turn, Liam offered a faint smile that didn't quite match the polished grin he'd shown the others. She almost expected him to greet her by name, but he held back, following the formal script. "Hello," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Liam Harrison, CEO, and you are—" Lucy cleared her throat, cursing her shaky voice. "I'm Lucy Mitchell, administrative assistant to the corporate division." She gave his hand a brief, firm shake. His gaze held a trace of the warmth she remembered, but he maintained professionalism. "Lucy, it's nice to meet you," he replied, though the subtle tension in his voice hinted at more. She nodded, swallowing. "Welcome to Harrington Tech," she managed, forcing a polite smile, unsure if anyone was watching their exchange closely. Before she could add anything else, Martin stepped in, patting Liam's shoulder. "Lucy's one of our best," Martin chimed, wearing a friendly grin. "She has that R&D personnel report you requested." Lucy held out the folder with shaky hands. "Yes, right here." Liam took it, eyes steady on hers for half a beat longer than was typical. She felt a surge of heat in her cheeks, half expecting him to say something referencing Friday night, but he only broke the stare and thanked her. More employees hovered close by, eager for a moment with the CEO, so Lucy stepped aside, feeling both a wave of relief and a pang of confusion. The question echoed in her mind, why pretend not to know me at all? She spent the rest of the day like a shadow, drifting through her tasks mechanically. Each time she ventured into the hallway, she caught glimpses of Liam touring different departments with Martin. She overheard employees discussing how charismatic and approachable he seemed, a stark contrast to the more rigid leadership styles of previous CEOs. Around mid-afternoon, Lucy's phone chimed with an email notification. It was from CEO Office, with a subject line, "Meeting Request." Her stomach flipped. Opening the email, she saw that Liam's executive assistant wanted to schedule a short private discussion with Lucy the next day. There was no explanation, no details, just a 15-minute slot on the calendar. Her mind whirled. Did this have to do with their personal connection? Or was he simply following up on the R&D report? She couldn't confide in anyone without revealing the night at the restaurant. Cynthia would say it was fate, but Lucy felt more alarm than excitement. She recalled Esther's words about seeking advice whenever she felt cornered. Yet Lucy also sensed that if she told Esther the whole truth, it could spark office rumors, something Lucy desperately wanted to avoid. When the workday ended, Lucy packed her bag with trembling hands. She hurried out before Martin or anyone else could ask her to stay late. On the train ride home, her thoughts drifted to the moment she'd first seen him at La Belle Fontaine, how he'd looked just like any ordinary guy. She remembered the light-hearted jokes they'd shared, the gentle interest he'd shown in her life. Now, he was her CEO. That single fact changed everything, overshadowing whatever spark had drawn them together. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Cynthia, likely checking in to see how the big day had gone. Lucy stared at it but hesitated to reply. She rested her head against the window, the rumble of the tracks lulling her into a fog of anxiety and anticipation. She realized she needed to summon the courage to figure out why Liam had concealed his identity. That 15-minute meeting tomorrow felt like both an opportunity and a minefield. The following morning, Lucy found herself in new territory. As usual, she arrived early at the office, hoping to avoid the swirl of gossip about the newly arrived CEO, but it was impossible to ignore. Everyone was talking about Liam Harrison's plans to modernize Harrington Tech's operations. Some were excited about potential growth and innovation, others worried about sweeping changes and layoffs. Sipping her coffee at her desk, Lucy watched the clock inch closer to the appointed time of her meeting. She tried to plan what she'd say if he brought up their restaurant encounter. Would she be honest about her confusion and embarrassment? Or should she pretend it never happened, thereby preserving her professional credibility? When the digital clock finally read 9:55 a.m., Lucy gathered her notepad and walked to the executive suite. The difference between her humble cubicle and this polished hallway was stark. The carpet was thicker, the artwork on the walls more refined. Everything screamed wealth and corporate hierarchy. She'd never ventured there unless dropping off a document or assisting on a special project. She was greeted by Liam's executive assistant, Lauren, a tall woman in her early 30s with immaculate makeup and a meticulously tailored suit. Lauren offered a polite smile. "Lucy Mitchell, Mr. Harrison is ready for you?" She stood to open the heavy wooden door that led to the CEO's office. Lucy stepped inside and paused. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Chicago's skyline, letting in a flood of morning light. The office was sleek, minimalistic, dominated by a large glass desk and a few plush chairs. Liam sat behind the desk, but when he spotted Lucy, he rose and gestured for her to join him in a sitting area near the windows, where two modern armchairs faced each other across a small coffee table. "Thanks, Lauren," he said, dismissing his assistant with a nod. Lauren quietly shut the door, leaving them alone. Lucy's heart pounded so loudly that she wondered if he could hear it. "Lucy," he began, letting out a careful breath, "I appreciate you coming in." He wore a navy suit that fit him flawlessly, far more formal than the outfit he'd worn at the restaurant. Still, the sincerity in his eyes seemed familiar. She sank into the armchair opposite him, her posture stiff. "Of course," she managed. She glanced at her notepad, half expecting to jot down bullet points. Liam hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. "I want to talk about, well, us." He paused, as if gauging her reaction. When she said nothing, he continued, "I realize this situation is awkward. I didn't intend to mislead you the other night, but when I recognized what was happening, that you thought I was someone else, I guess I found it intriguing. I don't often get to meet people who don't see me as a CEO or a potential business deal." Lucy chewed her lip, recalling how easily she'd shared her life story with him, thinking he was an everyday accountant. "Why didn't you just tell me your name up front?" she asked, voice tense but controlled. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I wanted to, but you were so genuine, I couldn't bring myself to spoil it. I didn't expect we'd hit it off. I just wanted a normal conversation." He exhaled. "But I understand this has put you in a difficult position. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable at work." The sincerity in his tone made Lucy's defenses waver. "I do feel awkward," she admitted, looking down at her notepad. "I'm a private person, and I rely on this job. If people think—" She struggled to find the right words. "That I got close to you for a promotion or any kind of favoritism, it'd look terrible." He nodded. "I know, and I don't want that either." A hint of apology flickered in his eyes. "Look, I value what happened on Friday, but I also understand we're now in a professional environment. The last thing I want is to jeopardize your position here or undermine my leadership." Lucy's pulse steadied, though anxiety still gnawed at her. "So, what are we supposed to do?" Liam exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly. "For now, let's be co-workers, strictly. Harrington Tech is going through enough changes without rumors. However," he added softly, "I'd like us to keep in touch outside of the office, if you're willing. I want to make it clear that what I felt was real, not a game, but only if you're comfortable." A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in Lucy's chest. On one hand, she recalled the kindness he'd shown her, the way he'd listened intently over dinner. On the other, she feared workplace gossip, the precariousness of her sister's medical bills, and her own swirl of insecurities. "All right," she said carefully, "strictly professional here, and maybe we can talk personally once things settle down." A small, relieved smile touched his lips. "Yes, thank you." He stood, extending a hand. She shook it cautiously, aware that they were forging a delicate agreement. "I have some pressing meetings," he concluded, stepping back, "but I appreciate this. If you have any concerns, professional concerns, come to me or my assistant." Lucy nodded, turning toward the door with shaky composure. Just as she reached for the handle, he spoke again, voice quieter. "Lucy, I really am sorry for the confusion." She glanced over her shoulder. "I know," she whispered. not entirely trusting her voice to stay steady. She opened the door to return to the busy halls of the executive suite, feeling like she'd crossed into a realm where the stakes were far higher than she'd ever imagined. Lucy spent the next few days walking a tightrope of caution, attempting to maintain a sense of normalcy. She resisted the temptation to linger in hallways where she might run into Liam. Instead, she buried herself in tasks, scheduling executive travel, compiling expense reports, and organizing departmental rosters for HR. If her co-workers noticed any tension, they mostly kept it to themselves, occupied by their own concerns over potential reorganization. She sought solace by chatting briefly with Hannah Rogers, a data analyst she'd grown friendly with. Hannah was 29, a single mother juggling childcare and a demanding role in the analytics team. She rarely had time for office gossip, which made Lucy feel safe confiding small details about her stress, though she never mentioned Liam by name. One afternoon, Hannah set down her coffee mug on Lucy's desk and sighed heavily. "They're asking me to model cost-cutting scenarios for the product lines," Hannah said, her brow furrowed with worry. "There's talk of layoffs if we can't find other ways to save money. I don't want to sound paranoid, but the atmosphere here is tense." Lucy's stomach twisted, thinking not only of her own job, but of Emily's medical insurance. "I hadn't heard specifics," Lucy said, choosing her words carefully. "But I know the new CEO wants to streamline processes." Hannah nodded grimly. "Yeah, well, let's hope the streamlining doesn't mean cutting entire departments. Some of us can't afford to be unemployed." She paused, giving Lucy a meaningful look. "I know you can't either." A pang of fear shot through Lucy. She forced a small smile. "I'll cross my fingers we find better solutions. Let me know if you need help with anything." Later that day, Lucy recalled what Esther had told her. "You have value here." She decided to seek a bit of advice from Esther, who seemed to have a knack for reading corporate undercurrents. She found the HR manager in her office, scanning through policy updates on her computer. "Esther," Lucy said softly after knocking on the door frame, "could we talk for a moment?" Esther waved her inside with a warm smile. "Of course, Lucy. Have a seat." Lucy settled into the same chair as before, feeling more tense than last time. "I'm worried about rumors of layoffs. My colleague in analytics thinks the R&D group might be a target." Esther's expression turned thoughtful. "We've heard the whispers too. The board wants to see increased profitability, but that doesn't automatically mean heads will roll. Liam, Mr. Harrison, has been talking a lot about strategic investments rather than blanket cuts. Still, I can't offer guarantees." Lucy pressed her lips into a thin line. "I understand. I'm anxious. My sister depends on my insurance. I can't lose this job, or we'll be in serious trouble." Esther nodded with sympathy. "I'll keep an ear out for any developments, and I'll do what I can to advocate for employees' best interests. Meanwhile, continue performing at your usual high level. Show the new CEO and the board that people like you are indispensable." She paused, leaning forward. "And if anything comes up on a personal level that you think might affect your position, come see me." Lucy wasn't entirely sure if Esther suspected more was going on, but she gave a grateful nod. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. Even though she couldn't reveal everything, it comforted her to have someone in her corner. She left Esther's office with a surge of determination. She decided to explore opportunities for improvement in her department, ideas to streamline administrative work, so that if any cost-saving plan took shape, her role would be too valuable to slash. Over the next few days, she studied processes, created spreadsheets that showed how tasks could be centralized, and even proposed minor software tweaks that could reduce redundancies. It was extra effort, especially with her weekend shifts at the cafe, but she forced herself to push through the fatigue. In brief hallway interactions, Lucy occasionally spotted Liam passing by with Martin or other senior managers. Their eyes would meet, and he'd give a reserved nod. Once or twice, she thought she caught the faintest suggestion of a smile, almost an apology, in the flicker of his gaze. True to their agreement, neither made any personal overtures at work. Despite the tension, Lucy felt small comforts in the camaraderie of co-workers like Hannah, or in the quiet support of Esther. She wondered if she could balance a discreet personal connection with Liam outside the office, but she also worried about what might happen if the rumor mill fired up. Most nights, she returned home to Emily utterly exhausted, hardly able to hold a conversation. She'd collapse into bed, her mind racing with scenarios of how to preserve the life she'd worked so hard to maintain. Yet under the surface of that fear lay a tiny current of optimism. Lucy remembered Liam's sincerity when he told her he valued what they shared that night. Part of her clung to the hope that beyond the stiff suits and corporate policies, two people who'd once bonded by accident might find a way to connect again. Even in the high-stakes world they now inhabited, several weeks passed, and the dust seemed to settle, at least on the surface. Lucy continued improving administrative processes, impressing her direct manager, Martin, who praised her initiative in team meetings. Meanwhile, whispers of reorganization still floated around, but no official announcements were made. In the lull, Lucy's wariness faded enough that she started to take short coffee breaks in the main lobby, occasionally catching glimpses of Liam, always from a respectful distance. On a breezy Friday afternoon, as Lucy finished up a series of emails, her desk phone rang. She recognized the extension of Adam Carter, a respected leader in the product development department. Adam, 42 and balding slightly, was known for his fair management style and for nurturing younger talent. "Lucy," came Adam's deep, friendly voice, "I hear you're the one responsible for these new scheduling templates I've been using. They've saved me and my team hours of grunt work. Mind sharing how you put it all together?" She brightened. "Oh, sure, Adam. I just noticed your team's deadlines often overlapped with bigger corporate events. I used a shared calendar approach and added reminders for the small tasks." Adam let out a grateful chuckle. "It's been a godsend. We're about to launch a new prototype. I need all hands on deck to meet investor expectations. Listen, if you're free, my team could use your organizational knack. Some of the bigger projects might need extra coordination." Lucy considered her workload and Emily's medical demands. Still, she realized any extra visibility and trust from a department leader could bolster her job security. "I'm game," she agreed, glancing at her upcoming schedule. "Just let me know what you need." When she joined Adam's team meeting the following week, she found a cluster of engineers and marketing specialists huddled over design charts. Adam welcomed her with a wave, introducing her to the group. One face stood out, Hannah, who'd apparently been assigned to product development for data analysis. They exchanged quick, friendly smiles. "All right, everyone," Adam began. "We have to refine the pitch for the new artificial intelligence prototype by next month. Investors are keen, but we're behind schedule. Lucy has kindly offered to help streamline the process." Lucy stepped forward, distributing an outline she'd prepared, key milestones, deadlines, and budget constraints. She saw interest spark in several pairs of eyes. Working as a coordinator suited her. It made her feel both purposeful and connected to the pulse of the company. Hannah offered a supportive nod whenever Lucy explained how the group could centralize their tasks. After the meeting, Lucy and Hannah walked toward the elevator together. "I had no idea you were this good at project organization," Hannah admitted, tucking a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. "We've always known you're reliable, but this is next level." Adam seems thrilled. Lucy felt a flush of pride. "It's mostly common sense, plus a bit of experience with time management. My schedule outside of work can be chaotic, so I learned to compartmentalize everything. Hannah shot her a curious glance as they stepped into the elevator. I know you have a sister with health issues. Is that why you're so good at juggling tasks? Lucy hesitated, then nodded. Emily's situation taught me a lot about deadlines and priorities. When it's life or death, you figure out how to make every minute count. Their conversation was cut short when the elevator stopped, letting more employees in. Lucy noticed Esther stepping in as well. The older woman gave them both a warm smile. Lucy couldn't help but feel a sense of solidarity. Here they were, women across different roles, quietly supporting one another in a company that sometimes felt impersonal. Once they returned to their respective floors, Lucy settled back at her desk, scanning her inbox. She paused when she saw a message from Liam's executive assistant, Lauren, requesting an updated progress report from Adam's department. Lucy realized she'd need to gather the data quickly to present it accurately. She wrote a swift note to Hannah, asking for relevant numbers, and set about compiling the rest. A few hours later, Lucy dropped off the neatly arranged file at Lauren's desk. Lauren glanced through it, eyebrows arching with approval. Perfect. Mr. Harrison's going to appreciate how thorough this is, she said, flipping a page. You're Lucy Mitchell, right? Lucy managed a polite nod, ignoring the flutter in her stomach. Yes. You're very diligent, Lauren commented offhandedly, slipping the file into a folder labeled CEO Review. I'll be sure to mention it to Mr. Harrison. Lucy forced a professional smile, her pulse quickening. Though it was a small remark, the idea that Liam might see her name linked to quality work felt oddly gratifying. It was a validation of her capabilities, independent of any personal history they shared. She returned to her desk, aware of a faint hope that with each successful project she might prove her worth not only to the company, but also quell the anxiety about layoffs. Another thought nagged at her, though the silent agreement she and Liam had made to keep their personal connection outside these walls. She wondered if he reviewed her reports more carefully than others, or if he'd notice her name on documents with that same spark of recognition she felt whenever she heard his voice carry through the hall. Late that Friday, as the office buzz wound down, Lucy noticed an unusual tension on her floor. She overheard snippets of conversation from a few worried colleagues, something about Charles Whitmore, a senior board member known for his traditional views and strong influence. Rumor had it he was scheduled to meet with Liam Harrison about cost efficiency measures. Lucy didn't know Charles personally, but everyone whispered he preferred old-school corporate approaches. He was rumored to be skeptical of Liam's more progressive plans. If Charles had his way, entire departments could be slashed to make the bottom line sparkle for investors. Lucy recalled Hannah's anxieties and felt a chill run through her. It was nearly 6 o'clock when she spotted Martin, her manager, pacing by the water cooler. He looked uncharacteristically frazzled, clutching a manila folder. Lucy approached with caution. "Martin, everything all right?" He jerked his head up. "Oh, Lucy, it's complicated. Mr. Whitmore called a surprise meeting with me earlier. He said the R&D budget is too large, that we might need radical cuts." He ran a hand over his thinning hair. "I know you've been assisting with new processes and they look promising, but Whitmore wants immediate, visible changes." Lucy felt her pulse accelerate. "Did he mention anything specific about layoffs?" Martin sighed. "Not explicitly, but he has a track record. He insinuated that if the numbers don't improve fast, entire teams could be on the chopping block." A knot tightened in Lucy's stomach. Her job, Hannah's job, possibly many others, hung in the balance. "What can we do?" Martin frowned. "We need to finish those cost analyses you and Adam have been working on. Present them in such a way that shows we're already making strides, but I don't know if it'll be enough." Before Lucy could respond, Martin excused himself to meet with Adam. The news weighed heavily on her mind. She thought about Esther's advice to remain calm and keep performing at a high level. But was that enough to stop a man like Charles Whitmore? She'd never met him, though she'd heard stories of how he dismantled smaller divisions in other companies under the guise of efficiency. Clutching her notes, Lucy decided to gather more intel. She remembered that Esther might have insight into the corporate politics swirling behind the scenes. Esther was known to keep an ear to the ground and maintain friendly connections at various levels. Esther was just about to leave for the day, purse slung over her shoulder, when Lucy caught her in the HR hallway. "Esther," Lucy said in a hushed tone, "I just heard about Whitmore pushing for immediate cuts in R&D. Martin's really anxious." Esther's expression darkened. "Charles Whitmore is powerful. He's been on the board for ages and doesn't shy away from forcing layoffs. If he sees no swift improvement in the quarterly reports, he may pressure Liam to comply." Lucy clenched her jaw, wishing she could talk to Liam directly, but she also remembered their agreement. Keep things professional, no personal angles. "Do you think Liam will stand up to him?" she asked. Esther's gaze softened, as though she understood Lucy's unspoken concern. "Hard to say. Mr. Harrison is the new CEO, but he still needs board support. Charles can make his tenure difficult if they clash too openly." Lucy let out a breath. "Maybe the cost-saving measures I've been working on with Adam will help. I just hope it's enough." Esther patted Lucy's arm gently. "Focus on the data and present it compellingly. If we show real improvements, it might buy us time. Don't lose hope." That evening, Lucy stayed late, compiling every relevant fact and figure into a neat, digestible format. She shot emails to Hannah and Adam, requesting additional input. They responded quickly, equally worried. By 9 o'clock, Lucy's eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, but she pressed on, determined to present a robust case. A sudden buzz from her phone startled her. A new text message blinked on the screen, an unknown number. The message read, "Hi, it's Liam. I hope you're doing all right. Are you still at the office?" Her heart skipped. He must have used her number from the slip of paper she'd given him at the restaurant. She glanced around the near-empty cubicles, as if worried someone might see. Quickly, she typed back, "Yes, working late. There's news about budget cuts in R&D. Everyone's on edge." She hovered, unsure if she should be sending this. Within minutes, his reply came, "I'm in my office. Let me walk you out when you're done. We can at least make sure you're safe getting to your car or train." Lucy hesitated. The building was almost deserted, so it might go unnoticed. She typed a short response. "Okay, 15 minutes." True to her word, Lucy wrapped up her final edits and shut down her computer. With her bag over her shoulder, she moved toward the executive suite. The corridor lights had been dimmed for the night, giving the space a somber feel. Liam stood near his office door, tie loosened, jacket folded over one arm. When their eyes met, a flood of relief and yearning washed over her. She forced herself to keep it professional. He stepped closer, voice low. "You've been working late. Thank you for your efforts. It hasn't gone unnoticed." She swallowed a lump in her throat, fighting the urge to confide all her fears about Whitmore's threat. Instead, she gave a tight nod. "I just want to help the company succeed," she said carefully, her voice thick with unspoken worries. He escorted her through the quiet halls, making sure the security guards saw them exit. They paused at the main entrance, the city's cool air pushing against the doors. For a moment, they stood beneath the building's impressive facade. A swirl of uneasy emotions churned in Lucy's chest. She thought about Charles Whitmore, about Emily, about how precarious everything felt. Liam caught her gaze. "You're doing good work," he said softly. "I'll do everything I can to protect the people who keep this company running." She nodded, uncertainty clouding her mind. She didn't know if he truly had the power to shield her or anyone else from a ruthless board member, but in that fleeting moment, she clung to the promise in his words, hoping that their shared drive to do the right thing might be enough to ward off the looming threat. They stepped out into the streetlights, the quiet hum of downtown Chicago enveloping them. Lucy felt that she was on the brink of a much larger confrontation, one that could decide not only her career, but the fragile security she and Emily depended on. Lucy arrived at the office on Monday morning with a renewed sense of determination. The tension over potential R&D cuts had intensified since her late-night conversation with Liam. Yet she wasn't about to cave under the pressure. Armed with freshly printed cost analyses and a plan she'd polished over the weekend, she marched straight to Adam Carter's workspace to finalize a presentation for the coming board review. "Morning," Adam greeted, eyes rimmed with fatigue. He gestured to the cluttered conference table near his desk, piled high with prototypes and thick product specs. "I've been here since dawn, trying to make sense of the new budget outlines. Whitmore's demanding immediate results." Lucy set down her laptop and gave him a reassuring nod. "We'll get through this," she said, though a flicker of worry tightened her voice. "Any new data from Hannah?" Adam flipped open a folder. "She stayed late pulling metrics on projected revenue if our AI prototype launches on time. The numbers look decent, but with Whitmore, you know how it is." Lucy did know, and yet, as she scanned the sheets of data, she spotted a small victory. If the prototype performed even half as well as projected, it could offset a significant chunk of the R&D budget. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was something. She carefully inserted Hannah's charts into the presentation, then double-checked all the figures to ensure there were no errors. Every minute detail mattered now. Mid-morning, they briefed a few team members on how to deliver a concise but impactful pitch. Lucy's knack for organization shone through. She laid out the order of talking points and fielded questions about potential criticisms from Whitmore. Questions flew across the table. What if he points out overhead costs? Will he question the development timeline? Lucy answered calmly, referencing the data compiled by various specialists. Every response dripped with cautious optimism, underscoring that the team was already working to address concerns. She spotted a glimmer of relief in Adam's eyes and in the half-smiles of the engineers. By early afternoon, the group dispersed, leaving Lucy to finalize the slides. The hush of the office gave her time to reflect. She'd always been diligent, but these recent weeks had tested her beyond what she'd ever anticipated. Between her sister's health, the unpredictability of corporate politics, and the unresolved personal tension with Liam, she felt stretched thin. Yet, the sense of purpose steadied her. If this pitch succeeded, real jobs might be saved, hers included. A ping on her phone startled her from her thoughts. She glanced down and saw a text from Emily. "Hey Lou, next doctor appointment is tomorrow afternoon. Can you come?" Lucy's heart clenched. Emily's treatments and checkups were never guaranteed to be smooth. Sighing, Lucy texted back, "Of course, I'll figure out something at work so I can be there." She made a mental note to speak with Martin, hoping he'd grant her a couple of hours away from the office. She couldn't risk losing her job, but she also refused to abandon Emily when she needed support. Late in the day, Lucy headed to the cafeteria for a quick break. She found Hannah picking at a small salad, eyes skimming a printed stack of data. Hannah looked up and waved her over. "Thanks for using my numbers in the presentation," Hannah said, her tone hushed. "I feel weirdly proud, like maybe we can prove to Whitmore this team is essential." Lucy dropped into the seat across from her, taking a moment to rub her tired eyes. "You should be proud. Your analysis could save a lot of jobs." Hannah studied Lucy for a beat. "You look exhausted. Everything okay?" Lucy offered a weary smile. Just worried about my sister and about the meeting with Whitmore. Feels like we're bracing for a storm." Hannah reached across the table and gave Lucy's hand a gentle squeeze. "We'll get through it. You're stronger than you think. And let's be honest, you're basically our secret weapon, a wizard at organization and strategy." A small laugh escaped Lucy. "That might be an overstatement, but thanks for the vote of confidence." Before she could say more, a flurry of movement near the cafeteria entrance caught her eye. Liam, trailed by a couple of senior managers, walked briskly past. Their eyes met briefly. He offered the slightest nod, an acknowledgement that seemed meant only for her. She quickly looked away, focusing on Hannah's data sheets, her heart fluttering with unspoken questions. They had maintained their agreed-upon professional distance, which was both reassuring and oddly painful. After lunch, Lucy threw herself back into work, preparing for the big demonstration of their R&D plan at the end of the week. Each completed slide, each data set double-checked, felt like a step closer to proving their department's worth. Small triumphs, like clarifying a revenue forecast or adjusting a timeline, stacked up, fueling Lucy's resolve. As dusk settled in, she paused to stretch her arms and reflect on the day's progress. They had made steady headway, yet a knot of dread remained in her stomach. She reminded herself that even small victories counted, that each minor achievement was a piece in a larger puzzle, forging a path towards stability for her and so many others. In an environment fraught with uncertainty, Lucy clung to the hope that her growing confidence and the team's unity might yet tip the scales in their favor. The following morning, Lucy woke early to prepare for Emily's doctor appointment. Her anxiety level was high. Not only was she juggling her crucial tasks at Harrington Tech, she also dreaded the possibility of her sister's condition worsening. She managed to squeeze in a conversation with Martin first thing, explaining that she needed to leave around lunchtime. Martin, though visibly stressed by the upcoming R&D review, granted permission. "You've earned some personal time," he said, sounding genuinely sympathetic. "Just be back tomorrow morning or email me if anything changes." Lucy thanked him and slipped away to collect the last bits of data for Adam. "I'll be back tomorrow," she whispered to Adam when he swung by her cubicle. He gave her a supportive nod, reading the worry in her eyes. "Don't think twice about work," he said. "We'll handle final touches on the slides." Just before noon, Lucy made her way to the parking garage, only to run into Liam stepping out of the elevator. He was alone, a rare moment without managers or board members hovering. He appeared surprised to see her leaving early, brow furrowing as he noticed her tense grip on her purse. "Lucy?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "You're off early?" She hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell him everything about Emily's situation. Another part reminded her they had an unspoken pact to keep professional boundaries within these walls. But the genuine concern in his gaze made her speak. "I have to take my sister to a medical appointment." Liam's expression softened. He glanced at his watch, then back at her. "Is everything okay?" She tried for a reassuring tone, though her eyes betrayed worry. "I hope so. It's a routine checkup. But with her condition, nothing is ever simple." He nodded, stepping a bit closer. "You need to go. But if there's anything I can do..." He paused, remembering where they were. "Well, just let me know." Lucy felt an odd comfort in his presence, as though for a moment the corporate tensions fell away. "I appreciate that," she whispered. Then she managed a small, grateful smile and brushed past him, heading to her car. The hospital halls, with their sterile white lights and faint odor of disinfectant, brought back old memories of sleepless nights waiting on test results. Emily was seated in a plastic chair by the reception area when Lucy arrived, looking pale but trying to appear upbeat. "Hey, sis," Emily greeted, forcing a wry grin. "Thanks for coming. You must be swamped at work." Lucy gave her a quick hug. "Don't worry about that. How are you feeling?" Emily shrugged, a bit worn out. "But we'll see what the doctor says." She hesitated, then added, "Thanks for always being here, Lucy." Waiting for Emily's name to be called, Lucy couldn't help replaying the conversation with Liam in her head. She wondered if it was a mistake to let him see her vulnerability. At the same time, she was glad he hadn't pried too deeply. She wasn't sure how she'd handle mixing her personal fears with her precarious work situation. After a series of tests, Emily's physician, a tall man named Dr. Rivera, finally met with them in a small examination room. He reviewed the chart, occasionally adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Emily," he began, tapping the file in his hand, "the results indicate that your condition remains stable, but we can't reduce treatments yet. We have to continue the same protocol. Hopefully, in a few more months, we'll see real improvement." Lucy released a shaky breath. Stability was better than decline. Emily forced a brave smile, though Lucy could see a flicker of disappointment in her sister's eyes. The added stress of continuing expensive treatments weighed on both of them, especially Lucy, who silently calculated the costs. Later, as Lucy drove them home, Emily's voice broke the silence. "So, you're really busy with that new CEO, right? Any updates?" Lucy kept her gaze on the road, unsure how much to reveal. "He's implementing changes, trying to improve the company's performance. There's a board member who wants cuts, but I'm hoping we can prove our department's worth before that happens." Emily picked at a loose thread on her sweater. "You're worried about your job," she said flatly. Lucy nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I am. But I'm doing everything I can to make sure we're seen as essential." Emily turned to her, eyes full of gratitude and guilt. "You do too much for me, Lucy." Lucy shot her a look that was both fierce and loving. "Don't ever say that. You're my sister." That evening, after settling Emily in bed, Lucy felt an unshakable heaviness. The idea that a single boardroom decision could upend her life gnawed at her. She found herself wishing she could talk openly with Liam. But their connection felt like a delicate thread stretching between two worlds. The personal bond formed in a moment of mistaken identity and the high-stakes corporate realm they now occupied. She stood by the window, gazing at the city lights. On the desk lay a stack of medical bills demanding urgent attention and a binder with Harrington Tech's strategic plans. Two lifelines in her small, tumultuous world. Each demanded energy, devotion, and sacrifice. Lucy closed her eyes, feeling the strain of wanting to do right by everyone, her sister, her co-workers, even the CEO who'd shown her kindness. A knot of conflicting loyalties pulled at her, leaving her at a moral crossroads. She vowed to keep pushing forward, no matter how blurred the lines became between duty and desperation. Early the next morning, Lucy returned to Harrington Tech. Despite her exhaustion from hospital worries, she fell into her office routine with practiced efficiency. She had to finalize the R&D presentation for a meeting that afternoon, a crucial step in demonstrating the department's value. As she double-checked spreadsheets with Adam, a call from Martin summoned them to a small conference room. Inside, Martin's expression was grim. "There's been a leak," he said, flipping through an internal memo. "Somebody in upper management mentioned that the board is looking at shutting down entire sections of R&D if immediate cost savings aren't found. The rumor is all over the building now." Lucy's stomach lurched. This was the worst possible timing, especially since they'd been counting on the upcoming presentation to calm everyone's fears. She glanced at Adam, who looked equally alarmed. "How do we address it?" Adam asked, voice tight. Martin sighed. We do the presentation as planned, but you need to be ready for tough questions. Whitmore's behind the push, and he's got enough sway with certain board members that even Liam can't override him easily. People are panicking. Some staff are already updating their resumes or asking about transfers. Lucy realized with dread that the morale crisis alone could damage the project's success. If half the team stopped believing in a future at Harrington Tech, their dedication to the prototype would wane. She gripped her pen. "We'll make sure the data is rock solid," she insisted. "We'll show them it's more financially viable to keep R&D intact." After Martin dismissed them, Lucy and Adam scrambled to polish the deck. The clock ticked ominously toward the afternoon meeting. Tension threaded every conversation in the office. Lucy overheard hushed discussions about worst-case scenarios, home foreclosures, lost insurance, the heartbreak of job hunting in a saturated market. As she grabbed a quick coffee, Lucy ran into Hannah, who looked paler than usual. "I heard about the leak," Hannah said, voice subdued. "My son's only 5. If I lose this job—" Lucy rested a hand on Hannah's arm. "We're not giving up. Adam and I are pulling all the data together. We're presenting it today. Keep faith a bit longer." Hannah nodded, offering a shaky smile. "Thank you." By mid-afternoon, Lucy found herself in the main conference room, heart hammering as she arranged her notes. A panel of senior managers filed in, including Martin and Adam. Liam arrived last, stepping in with an air of calm authority that belied the swirling chaos. Lucy noticed how his gaze flicked toward her, as though checking if she was all right. Charles Whitmore entered moments later, flanked by 2 other board members. Lucy recognized him from photos. A tall, imposing figure in a tailored suit with sharp, scrutinizing eyes. He barely acknowledged anyone, taking a seat at the head of the table and rifling through papers with cool detachment. Liam settled beside him, jaw tight. Adam kicked off the presentation, quickly summarizing the key points. Lucy followed, walking the group through the cost-saving measures and the potential revenue from the AI prototype. Her voice was steady, despite the tightness in her chest. Each slide showcased carefully curated data Hannah and other analysts had compiled. Charles watched impassively, occasionally exchanging glances with the board members beside him. Lucy couldn't read his expression, but she felt his skepticism. When Adam finished, a tense silence filled the room. Liam spoke first, his tone measured but firm. "This is precisely what I've been talking about, innovation that sets us apart. Cutting R&D now would sabotage our competitiveness long-term." Charles's fingers drummed on the table. "Long-term is fine, Mr. Harrison, but I see immediate costs that remain high. Why should we invest in an uncertain prototype when we could slash expenses today?" Lucy stepped in, determined not to let the project be dismissed. "Because this prototype isn't pure speculation, sir. We already have potential clients expressing interest, enough to offset a significant portion of R&D expenses within the next 2 quarters. She gestured to a chart that Hannah had compiled, showing likely revenue scenarios. "Shutting us down may appear to save money quickly, but it'll cost the company potential gains and damage our industry standing." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Potential? Interest? None of this is guaranteed. Investors want hard numbers, not maybe." Liam's voice sharpened. "And we plan to deliver those numbers. We just need time to finalize. I won't recommend decimating a department that's on the verge of a breakthrough." The tension crackled. Lucy glanced around, noting the uneasy expressions of Adam and Martin. Charles sat back in his chair. "We'll see. The board is meeting next week to decide on budget allocations. I'll be weighing how this department's performance stacks up against the rest of the company. For now, keep working, but don't count on a miracle." With that, he gathered his notes and strode out, leaving an awkward hush in his wake. Liam lingered, looking over at Lucy with what she read as an apology in his eyes. Then he followed Charles, presumably for further discussions. Lucy exhaled, feeling drained. They'd made their best case, but Charles's words implied that the axe could still fall. She sensed that this was bigger than just a financial argument. It was a power struggle between Liam's forward-thinking vision and Charles's conservative, profit-driven approach. For Lucy and countless others, the stakes couldn't be higher. An uneasy quiet gripped Harrington Tech in the days following the tense meeting. Charles Whitmore's parting words hung like a storm cloud. Some employees, fearing the worst, began discreetly searching for other opportunities. Lucy noticed the once lively break-room conversations reduced to murmured speculation. Determined not to let the negativity spread, Lucy poured herself into refining the R&D data. Whenever fresh information came in, be it a minor tweak to the AI prototype or a slight uptick in client interest, she updated the forecasts. She insisted on having numbers at her fingertips so that if the board demanded proof at any moment, she'd be ready. One late afternoon, as Lucy was organizing her latest findings, Esther Collins from HR appeared at her cubicle. The gentle smile on Esther's face clashed with her worried eyes. "Lucy, mind if we step into my office for a moment?" Lucy nodded, following Esther down the hall. She tried to calm the rush of anxious thoughts, uncertain if this summons was good or bad. In Esther's office, the HR manager closed the door, then motioned for Lucy to sit. Esther lowered her voice. "I've just finished speaking with some of the board's administrative staff. They hinted that Whitmore is trying to force a departmental evaluation next week, one that could lead to a recommended staff reduction in R&D. Lucy's pulse kicked up. So soon. She'd hoped they might have more time to prove the prototype's value. Esther nodded gravely. He's pushing for it before Liam can solidify any supportive data or get more client commitments. Likely because that data would weaken his case. He wants to strike fast. Lucy felt a chill. So what can we do? Esther leaned forward. I've worked in HR for decades, and I know how political these decisions can be. But I also know some of the board members might be swayed by direct success stories, real voices, not just numbers on a page. If we can demonstrate how shutting down R&D disrupts not just business potential, but also the livelihoods of key employees, we might gain sympathy. Lucy's mind raced. We have employees with unique skills, personal stories, like Hannah, a single mom, or Patrick, who overcame a disability to excel in robotics. If they're laid off, the company loses invaluable expertise. Esther nodded. Exactly. Sometimes it's not the raw data that tips the scale, it's the human factor. I'm going to gather testimonies from employees willing to share how vital their roles are, how losing them would hurt the company. But she added with a cautious tone, I need your help to coordinate it without rousing suspicion. We don't want Whitmore labeling this as a smear campaign. A glimmer of determination lit Lucy's eyes. I'm in. Over the next few days, Lucy discreetly interviewed R&D members, collecting short statements about their work contributions and personal stakes. She heard stories of team members relocating across the country for the job, investing years in specialized research. She compiled everything, without sensationalism, into a confidential HR file Esther planned to present to the board. One afternoon, Lucy was in a conference room with Hannah, discussing the final details, when the door unexpectedly swung open. Standing there was Charles Whitmore. His cool gaze drifted between Lucy and Hannah before settling on the documents spread across the table. Busy at work, I see, he remarked, stepping inside uninvited. Hannah froze, her hand trembling slightly on a stack of charts. Lucy quickly closed a folder containing personal testimonies. We're refining the latest AI performance metrics, Lucy said evenly, hoping her voice sounded calm. Charles raised a skeptical brow. Is that so? I'd hate to see time wasted on side projects. Lucy forced a polite smile. Nothing is wasted, Mr. Whitmore. We're just ensuring our data is accurate, so the board sees R&D's full potential. He studied her for a tense moment. Well, accuracy is indeed critical. I've heard rumors of employees stirring up sentiments about job security. Let me make one thing clear. Decisions here are made based on hard facts, not sob stories. His gaze flicked to Hannah, then back to Lucy. Focus on results. The rest is noise. Without another word, he turned and left. Hannah exhaled shakily. He must suspect something. Lucy's chest tightened. Yes, but we can't stop now. We have to show the board both the data and the real people behind it. When she emerged from the conference room, Lucy nearly bumped into Liam, who was hovering in the hallway, a deep frown on his face. He must have seen Charles leave. His gaze darted to the closed door, then back at her. He lowered his voice. He didn't upset you, did he? Lucy shook her head slightly, her throat tight. We're fine, just being cautious. He nodded, tension radiating from his posture. Keep me posted if anything escalates. I'm trying to gather more investor interest to offset Whitmore's push. If I can show the board we already have funding interest, it might force them to delay or reconsider. Lucy mustered a small, grateful smile. All right, we'll do our part here. Good luck. They parted ways quickly, the fragile balance between them never more apparent. She felt a rush of gratitude that he cared enough to check on her, but also the sting of frustration that he couldn't simply wave a hand and stop Whitmore's plans. She continued down the corridor, hugging her files to her chest as though they were a shield against the cold corporate winds. An unlikely alliance was forming, Esther working behind the scenes, employees banding together, and Liam quietly maneuvering in the background. It was their best chance, Lucy realized, to counter Whitmore's relentless strategy. That evening, she stayed late to finalize the personal testimonies for Esther. Each story she read deepened her resolve. This wasn't just about saving her own paycheck. It was about protecting a network of dedicated professionals who believed in the potential of Harrington Tech's innovations. The slow hum of the cleaning staff's vacuum grew soothing in the background as Lucy typed, determined to face the coming battle, armed not just with numbers, but with the truth of human experience. By the end of the week, Lucy felt as if every nerve in her body was stretched taut. The looming evaluation stirred the entire office into a frenzy of last-ditch efforts. Adam's product development team hurried to assemble a basic demo of the AI prototype, an interactive display they hoped would convince board members of its near-finished viability. Hannah churned out more sophisticated revenue projections, fine-tuning the numbers daily. Lucy's desk became a command center. She coordinated with Esther on the testimonies, swapped updates with Adam, and fielded anxious calls from staff, wondering if there was anything else they could do to help. She barely had time to glance at personal messages, though a supportive text from Emily, "Hang in there," had kept her spirits afloat. Late on Friday afternoon, Lucy received a short message from Liam's executive assistant, Lauren. Mr. Harrison would like a brief update on the R&D data compilation. Please come to his office at 5 p.m. The day's tasks blurred together in her haste to prepare. By the time she made her way to Liam's office, her nerves were jittery from too much coffee and not enough sleep. She knocked softly on the heavy door, stepping inside when he called her in. He stood near the tall windows that framed the sparkling Chicago skyline, hands clasped behind him. The last rays of sunlight cast a warm glow across the sleek furniture. "Lucy," he greeted, turning with a thoughtful expression. "Thanks for coming. I won't keep you long." She offered a polite nod, staying near the door. Her heart thumped uncomfortably. The memory of their personal history always made these private encounters feel charged. "I have the latest numbers," she said, lifting a folder slightly, "and an outline of the cost-saving strategies. There's also some new data on projected client interest." He motioned for her to approach his desk. "Perfect. Thank you." He scanned the top page, eyes flicking over the columns of figures. "This is promising. We've attracted a small investor group that wants to see a formal prototype demonstration next month." He looked up. "That could be just enough to delay Whitmore's push if we leverage it well." Lucy let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That's good news. Any chance the board will hold off on cuts until after we show them real investor support?" Liam exhaled, setting the papers down. "I'm pushing for that, but Whitmore's influence is strong. We're in a tug-of-war, and I'm still building alliances on the board. Some are receptive, but others side with him for short-term profits." He hesitated, voice lowering. "How are you holding up?" She hesitated, unsure how honest to be. "It's a lot," she admitted. "I'm worried about everyone's jobs, about my own, about Emily's insurance. But I'm trying to stay hopeful. We've worked too hard to let this all fall apart." He reached out as though to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, then caught himself. They were still in the workplace. Instead, he tucked his hand into his pocket. "You're doing everything right. If we can weather this evaluation, there's a real shot we'll keep R&D intact." She nodded, words catching in her throat. For a moment, she thought about the night they first met, how different their dynamic had been. Now, even in a private office, they maintained careful propriety, two professionals seeking a common goal. Before she could say more, Liam's phone buzzed on the desk, the screen flashing with an incoming call. He glanced at it, lips pressed tight. "Charles Whitmore," he murmured. "He probably wants to discuss next week's board agenda." Lucy took that as her cue to leave. "I'll let you take that," she said softly, turning for the door. Just as she reached it, Liam called after her. "Lucy?" She paused, looking back. His expression was earnest, a flicker of the man she'd spoken with under candlelight at a fancy restaurant. "I appreciate what you're doing. Not just the spreadsheets, but the human stories you and Esther are collecting. Don't think I don't see how hard you're fighting for this." A surge of emotion rushed through her, though she kept her composure. "Thank you," she whispered, "and thank you for fighting too." She slipped out, closing the door behind her. In the hallway, she let out a shaky breath. Every day felt like walking across a high wire, balancing personal hopes and professional duties. Monday would bring fresh battles, an official evaluation, tense discussions, and the possibility of a final verdict on R&D's fate. Still, Lucy felt a glimmer of optimism. The puzzle pieces were in place, a demo from Adam's team, a trove of personal testimonies championed by Esther, solid investor interest, and her own finely tuned cost analyses. It wasn't a guaranteed victory, but it was a well-crafted defense. She headed to her desk to wrap up for the weekend. Despite the dread simmering in the pit of her stomach, she reminded herself that adversity had shaped her resilience. Tomorrow, she'd catch her breath, check on Emily, and brace for the showdown to come. If this was the build-up to a defining trial, she intended to meet it head-on, carrying not just her own hopes, but those of her co-workers who believed in a brighter future at Harrington Tech. Monday arrived with a sense of grim urgency. Lucy could feel it in the stale hush of Harrington Tech's corridors. Colleagues from R&D moved with tense shoulders, clutching documents and prototypes as if preparing for battle. Word had spread that the board's evaluation would take place that afternoon, and nearly everyone believed it would be decisive. Lucy spent the morning revisiting the plan with Adam and Hannah, verifying last-minute details in their datasets. The AI prototype was functioning well enough for a brief demonstration, and Hannah's revenue projections looked robust. Still, Lucy knew all their hard work could unravel if Charles Whitmore chose to ignore the facts. Shortly after lunch, Martin requested Lucy's presence in the executive conference room for a final rehearsal. She marched there with a folder tucked under her arm, trying to project confidence. Inside, she found Adam, Martin, and a handful of other department representatives waiting. A laptop was plugged into the large screen at the head of the table. "All right, folks," Martin began, scanning the group. "We have 30 minutes to refine our pitch before the real thing. Let's treat this as a dress rehearsal. Adam, you'll speak first on technical feasibility. Lucy, you'll handle the cost efficiency segment. Then Hannah will discuss projected revenue." Lucy nodded, throat tight. She quickly tested the slides on the overhead display, double-checking that all files opened smoothly. The run-through started, and Adam delivered his portion with clear, measured enthusiasm. Lucy noticed how he tightened some of the language to make it more compelling. When it was her turn, Lucy stood near the screen and walked them through the potential cost offsets, lower overhead for certain testing phases, minimized waste by leveraging existing infrastructure. She deliberately used the simplest terms, knowing that board members might not be tech experts. She concluded by emphasizing how minimal the financial risk would be, compared to the potential payoff. The team offered minor suggestions: speak slower here, add a quick chart there. By the time they finished the mock session, Martin looked genuinely pleased. "Great work," he declared. "Stay calm, keep to the data, and we have a fighting chance." An hour later, Lucy found herself sitting at a long, polished table in the main boardroom. Liam was at one end, Charles Whitmore at the other, with board members arranged in a semicircle. The atmosphere felt like a high-stakes trial, where each side would present arguments before some unyielding judge. Lucy swallowed hard, focusing on her breathing. Adam led off, showcasing the prototype with a short, well-orchestrated demonstration. The screen displayed a sequence of tasks, and the AI responded with minimal latency, an impressive feat for a project still in development. Some of the board members leaned forward in interest, muttering mild approval. Then Lucy took her cue. She'd practiced every word. She spoke about the phased rollout plan, the cost-saving measures, and the strategic partnerships that could be forged if the technology succeeded. Her voice held steady, but her mind churned with adrenaline. She ended with a firm statement: "This is not just an expenditure. It's an investment that positions Harrington Tech as a leader rather than a follower." Hannah then wrapped up by walking through her revenue model. She highlighted the conservative forecasts as well as the more optimistic scenarios, showing that even moderate success would recoup most of the short-term expenses. Lucy felt a stir of pride at the thoroughness of Hannah's numbers. Charles leaned back in his chair, arms folded. When Hannah finished, an eerie silence settled. He cleared his throat. "Impressive demonstration. But I see no guarantees we won't burn through more money before we see a return. Markets fluctuate. Client interest can evaporate if something shinier comes along." Liam leaned forward, hands placed calmly on the table. "We all know innovation carries risks," he said evenly. "But the team has minimized those risks. The biggest danger is stifling a project with proven promise." One board member, an older woman with a firm gaze, spoke up. "This aligns with the direction our competitors are taking. We'd fall behind without a comparable product." A flicker of annoyance crossed Charles's face. "We've been burned by experimental divisions before. We can't afford that again." Lucy felt her pulse spike. This was the crux. Charles framing R&D as a liability. She realized now was the moment to emphasize the human element. Clearing her throat, she addressed the table softly. We've compiled testimonies from key contributors, people whose specialized knowledge is essential to the prototype's success. If we cut R&D, we lose not just a project, but the irreplaceable skills of these employees. Their experience is what keeps us competitive. Charles gave her a cool stare. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills, Ms. Mitchell. Before she could respond, another board member, a dignified man in his 60s, raised a hand. Enough. We'll need time to deliberate. I want to see the testimonies you've gathered and review the data thoroughly. We'll reconvene shortly. With that, they adjourned. Liam caught Lucy's gaze, giving a subtle nod of reassurance. She exhaled, feeling the rush of nerves settle into uneasy anticipation. The confrontation hadn't been explosive, but the real verdict still hung in the air. The group filed out, leaving the board to discuss behind closed doors. Lucy, Adam, Hannah, and the others waited in the hallway, hearts pounding in collective dread. Lucy, Adam, and Hannah milled around the hallway outside the boardroom, joined by a few other anxious employees. The minutes dragged, each second magnifying their anxiety. A nearby clock ticked with an almost mocking cadence, reminding everyone that their fates could be decided within these walls. Hannah glanced at Lucy, voice trembling. "Do you think it made any difference? Our personal statements, the data, did it get through to them?" Lucy tried to keep her face calm. "We did everything we could," she said, noticing her own voice sounded more certain than she felt. "Now it's up to them to see the value." Meanwhile, Liam had stepped away to speak privately with a couple of board members who seemed open to persuasion. Lucy spotted him at the far end of the corridor, his posture tense. She wanted to approach him, but she held back. It was best to avoid drawing attention to their personal connection. Adam paced in small, restless circles, occasionally checking his phone. "If Whitmore pushes for an immediate vote, we might not have time to show the new investor interest. I've got 2 groups asking for a demonstration in a month. Maybe that would sway the board." Lucy nodded, thinking about the tension in the boardroom. "Let's hope they'll agree to a delay. A month would give us breathing room." After what felt like an hour, though it was closer to 20 minutes, Esther emerged from the boardroom, quietly closing the door behind her. She hurried over, adjusting her blazer. "They're still deliberating," she whispered. "Whitmore's pressing for immediate cuts. Liam and at least 2 board members are fighting for a postponement. It's a standoff right now." Hannah looked close to tears. "What can we do?" Esther shook her head, sympathy evident on her face. "Nothing more at this moment. They've asked me to step out while they weigh the evidence privately." Soon, a low murmur seeped through the doors. Raised voices, though muffled beyond comprehension. Lucy's stomach churned. She considered stepping away to get a breath of fresh air, but her legs felt anchored to the spot. She thought about Emily at home, about the medical bills stacked on her kitchen table. The precarious balance between hope and defeat felt razor thin. Suddenly, the boardroom door swung open, revealing Charles Whitmore and 2 other members. Whitmore's jaw was set, his expression betraying mild irritation. He offered the group in the hallway a brief, impersonal nod and brushed past them, heading toward the elevators. One of the board members, the dignified older man who had asked for a thorough review, paused. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for a final decision," he announced, addressing no one in particular. "Mr. Whitmore insisted on a quicker resolution, but we agreed it's best to consider all data. Please be prepared for any outcome." With that, he left, following Charles. Liam remained in the boardroom, presumably continuing discussions with another subset of the board. Lucy felt a pang of relief mixed with dread. They had a temporary reprieve, less than 24 hours to either reinforce their arguments or brace for the worst. The group slowly dispersed. Hannah looked at Lucy. "I should go pick up my son. Let me know if you hear anything." Lucy gave her a quick hug. "I will. Get some rest tonight." Adam offered Lucy a weary pat on the shoulder, then headed back to his desk to tidy up. Lucy lingered, uncertain if she should wait for Liam or gather her thoughts elsewhere. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emily. "How did it go? Any news?" She typed back quickly. "No decision yet. Maybe tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm okay." That last sentence was half true at best, but she wanted to shield Emily from extra stress. A hush settled across the office as most people filtered out for the day. Lucy wandered to a nearby lounge area and slumped into a chair by the window. Chicago's skyline stretched out in the fading light, the last glimmers of sun reflecting off glass towers. She realized how tired she was, her shoulders stiff from tension, her mind exhausted from worry. Moments later, Liam approached, tie loosened. She straightened, bracing for whatever he might say. His gaze held a mix of apology and resolve. "I tried to push them to hold off any big decision until they see the investor interest. We have some on the fence, but Whitmore won't budge." Lucy rubbed her temples. "So tomorrow morning, it could all go either way?" "Yes," he admitted softly. "If we can't sway a majority of the board, R&D might face the cuts Whitmore is demanding." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Lucy, I'm so sorry you're caught in this. You and your team deserve better." She forced a small, brave smile. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. We'll just have to wait and hope the facts convince them." He nodded, and for a moment it seemed as though he might say something more personal, some reassurance that transcended the boundaries of their professional environment. But the office lights flickered, signaling that the maintenance crew was making its evening rounds. His features settled into a resigned expression. "Try to get some rest," he said quietly, turning away. Left alone, Lucy pressed her eyes shut, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. She could almost hear Cynthia's voice telling her to breathe, to find a spark of optimism. Tomorrow would define the fate of countless employees and her own precarious future. Lucy woke before dawn, mind already churning with anticipation of the day's verdict. The city outside her window was still cloaked in darkness, but her thoughts blazed with possibilities. Would the board grant them time or declare immediate cuts? She forced herself through a quick shower, then prepared breakfast for Emily, who was still asleep. She left a note on the table, "Have a good morning. I'll let you know if anything changes today," and headed out, determined to arrive at the office early. The hum of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of computers greeted her in the half-empty building. Lucy settled at her desk, taking a moment to review the key points in her reports one last time. She wasn't sure if she'd have a final chance to address the board, but she wanted to be ready. Her phone vibrated, an email from Adam, simply reading, "I'm on my way. Let's keep our heads up." By 8 a.m., the tension was palpable. A small crowd from R&D gathered near the conference room, some pacing, others making idle conversation to fill the silence. Lucy spotted Hannah, who clutched a paper cup of coffee, eyes rimmed with worry. "Have you heard anything?" Hannah asked in a hushed tone. Lucy shook her head. "Not yet. We should know soon. The board meeting starts at 9. A few minutes before 9, Liam strode by, accompanied by Lauren, his executive assistant. He paused briefly near Lucy, offering a silent nod. In that fleeting look, she saw both determination and empathy. She gave a subtle nod in return, feeling a jolt of steadiness in her chest. She was reminded that, despite the distance they maintained, she wasn't fighting alone. The clock struck 9, and the board members filed into the conference room. Charles Whitmore arrived last, speaking tersely into his phone before shutting it off and stepping inside. The heavy doors closed, and R&D employees were left in an agonizing wait. Lucy, Adam, Hannah, and a cluster of others lingered nearby, exchanging tense smiles. Esther hovered in the hallway, her face composed but her eyes reflecting quiet concern. Time crawled. Lucy found herself in constant motion, refilling her water glass, adjusting items on her desk, scrolling aimlessly through her inbox. When her phone finally buzzed with a message from Martin, her heart lurched. The text read, "They want a final word from R&D. Lucy, can you come to the boardroom?" She shot a look at Adam, who nodded encouragingly. Then she hurried down the corridor, each step feeling heavier than the last. The doors opened to reveal the board members seated around the long table. Liam stood at the far end, arms folded. He gave Lucy the slightest, reassuring tilt of his head. "Ms. Mitchell," Charles began without preamble, "we've reviewed the data on your AI project, as well as the testimonies you helped compile. We appreciate the diligence, but a number of us remain unconvinced." His gaze flicked to a few nodding heads. "Before we finalize our vote, do you have anything further to say?" Lucy swallowed, stepping forward to stand near the center of the room. Her heart pounded, but she drew on her last reserves of courage. "Thank you for allowing me a moment," she said. She drew a slow breath. "In my years at Harrington Tech, I've seen how each department plays a role in the company's success. R&D is not an abstract cost. It's a powerhouse of innovation. Cutting it now means losing years of expertise and passion, people who've poured their creativity into making Harrington Tech competitive." She paused, willing her voice to stay steady. "I understand the board must weigh profits and stability, but I ask you to consider the long-term ramifications. If we maintain and properly support R&D, the potential returns, financial and reputational, will far exceed any short-term savings from layoffs." A silent beat passed. Lucy glanced at Liam, whose expression reflected unwavering support. Charles pursed his lips, unmoved. Then the older woman on the board who had spoken up previously tapped a pen on the table. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell," she said. "We'll deliberate for 10 more minutes. Please wait outside." With a curt bow of her head, Lucy exited. Her legs felt shaky, yet she managed to mask it. Adam, Hannah, and a few others immediately crowded around, anxious for news. Lucy could only repeat that the board wanted a final word, and that she'd done her best to defend the department. The group huddled, half in dread, half in hope. Exactly 10 minutes later, the door reopened. A different board member emerged, one Lucy barely knew. Clearing his throat, he addressed the cluster of employees in the hall. "The board has reached a decision." Lucy's breath caught. She stared, bracing for the words that could reshape everything. "The board has decided," the board member continued, looking over the anxious faces, "to grant R&D a 6-month extension to prove measurable results. This includes the AI prototype's demonstration to potential investors. If the department can show tangible contracts or significant partnerships, we will maintain R&D funding." A collective exhale coursed through the group. Some employees exchanged tearful smiles, while others simply sagged against the wall in relief. Hannah gripped Lucy's arm, whispering, "We did it for now." Lucy forced herself to remain composed, despite the sudden rush of emotion. She spotted Liam stepping out of the boardroom next, looking spent but relieved. Charles trailed behind with a hardened expression, clearly displeased. Lucy realized they hadn't exactly won outright. They'd only gained precious time, but it was enough. A chance to prove themselves. In a flurry of movement, the board members dispersed. Charles spoke quietly with a colleague, throwing a parting glance at Lucy that seemed to promise he'd be watching closely. She swallowed, feeling a shiver of lingering tension. As soon as Charles was out of earshot, Liam approached, voice low. "Congratulations. You all worked hard for this. I'm proud of you." "Thank you," Lucy said, letting out a shaky laugh. She realized how badly she wanted to hug him, to express the gratitude she felt, but they were still surrounded by watchful eyes, Adam walked over, giving Liam a respectful nod, then turned to Lucy, beaming. "We have 6 months," Adam said, his usual calm crumbling into a grin. "I know it's not an eternity, but it's the runway we needed. If we land that investor deal, we can finally stabilize R&D." Lucy felt tears prick her eyes. All the late nights, the frantic data analysis, the personal testimonies, none of it had been in vain. In 6 months, the company could transform or it could fail, but at least they had the chance to try. "Yes," she whispered. "Now we just have to deliver on the promise." That afternoon, the office buzzed with cautious celebration. Hannah and some of the engineers gathered in a small conference room to congratulate each other. Lucy joined them momentarily, sharing a round of heartfelt thanks. She recognized that they had become more than co-workers. They were people who'd faced a shared threat and found unity in adversity. By early evening, Lucy packed up her desk, mind spinning with relief and new concerns. She needed to call Emily to reassure her that, for now, the insurance and income were safe. But she also knew the real work was only beginning. 6 months to prove R&D's worth was a ticking clock. On her way out, she stopped by Esther's office. The HR manager lifted her head from behind a computer, eyes lighting with a knowing look. "I heard the news," Esther said, standing to greet Lucy with a warm smile. "It's not a perfect win, but it's progress." Lucy nodded, her voice thick with gratitude. "You helped us gather those personal statements. Thank you for everything." Esther's smile softened. "That was your dedication, Lucy. I just made it HR official. You have a gift for rallying people. Don't lose that." They parted with a nod of mutual respect. The hall was mostly empty now. Lucy walked toward the elevators, shoulders feeling lighter than they had in weeks. Halfway there, Liam appeared, his tie undone, a sign of his own exhaustion. He motioned for her to follow him into a quieter hallway near the back exit. Once they were out of sight, he turned, relief and warmth in his eyes. "We did it," he breathed, letting the corporate mask slip. "I can't tell you how thankful I am for your dedication. You and your team gave me the leverage I needed to hold off Whitmore's worst demands." Lucy exhaled. "It's more like we all did it. You stood up to Whitmore, and it made a difference." A flicker of emotion caught in her chest as she remembered the high stakes that still loomed. "But this isn't the end," he nodded gravely. "No, it's not. 6 months to prove success. It's a tight deadline." Lucy studied his face for a moment, noticing the faint shadows under his eyes. He'd fought hard too, probably risking his new role to protect the department. In the hush of that hallway, she felt the bond between them unspoken but unmistakably real. He glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then placed a light hand on her shoulder. "I know we agreed to keep things strictly professional here, but if you ever need to talk off the record about anything," she interrupted gently. "I appreciate that." Her throat tightened, not entirely from stress. An ache of longing flickered there, longing for simpler circumstances, for the carefree comfort they'd shared at the restaurant. "But yes," she added, "maybe after everything's settled, we can talk." Really talk? His eyes held a promise she recognized, the promise that their connection wasn't lost, just paused. He let his hand drop. "I'll wait for that day." They stepped apart, returning to the bigger world of Harrington Tech. Even in the glow of temporary victory, Lucy braced herself for the challenges ahead. She would have to juggle new investor demos, refine the AI project, keep the morale of her team stable, and in the midst of it all, figure out where she and Liam truly stood. But at least for this moment, they had reason to hope. The next few weeks at Harrington Tech were a whirlwind of activity. The AI prototype moved into more rigorous testing, with engineers fine-tuning algorithms and quashing bugs round the clock. Adam led daily briefings, ensuring every piece of progress was documented for potential investors. Hannah's revenue projections became increasingly detailed, weaving in real-world feedback and competitor analysis. Lucy found her role expanding. She coordinated site visits for a small group of venture capitalists, smoothed out schedules, and managed communications between R&D and the marketing department. Her calendar was color-coded and jammed, but she thrived under the sense of purpose. Each new milestone felt like another step away from the looming shadow of layoffs. In parallel, Lucy noticed subtle changes in the workplace culture. Sparks of optimism replacing the dread that once weighed down the halls. Teams collaborated more freely, forging cross-departmental relationships that hadn't existed before. It felt as if the near disaster had jolted everyone into valuing each other's contributions. One afternoon, as Lucy prepared the conference room for a key investor presentation, she was surprised to see Charles Whitmore stepping in. He walked around the polished table, eyes scanning the neatly arranged folders and refreshments. "I hear you're showcasing the prototype to some West Coast investors," he said, voice controlled. Lucy kept her tone polite. "Yes, they're interested in expanding into AI-driven solutions. We're hoping this demonstration will solidify their commitment." Charles offered a tight-lipped smile. "If that happens, it'd justify the board's decision to delay cuts. If it fails, though, we revert to the original plan." He paused, letting the implication hang. "Make sure you don't squander this opportunity, Ms. Mitchell." She met his gaze with steady composure. "We're fully prepared." He nodded curtly and exited, leaving the door ajar. Lucy released a slow breath, heart pounding. The memory of how close he'd come to axing R&D simmered beneath her calm facade. Yet, she also understood that proving the project's viability was the only way to secure a lasting victory. She was determined not to give Whitmore any reason to second-guess their progress. A few hours later, the West Coast investors arrived, a small team of 3, all wearing business-casual attire and curious expressions. Adam took the lead, guiding them through the prototype's features. Lucy monitored the demonstration from the back of the room, stepping in whenever logistical questions surfaced. The AI performed smoothly, responding to commands with surprising nuance. By the end of the hour, the investors looked impressed. "I see real promise here," one of them remarked, flipping through a set of slides Lucy had prepared. "We'd like to continue talks, possibly set up a pilot project to integrate this AI with our existing platforms." Adam's grin was unmistakable, and Lucy felt a wave of relief wash over her. Once the visitors left, she and Adam indulged in a quiet moment of shared excitement. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, giving her a light fist bump. "If all goes well, a pilot could translate into a real contract." Lucy nodded, heart swelling with hope. "We're going to make it, Adam. I can feel it." In the days that followed, negotiations with the investors picked up speed. Hannah polished financial projections specifically for the pilot program, while Lucy kept a close eye on timelines and deliverables. Esther discreetly reached out to staff, ensuring morale stayed high. Every small success added momentum. Even Martin seemed lighter, no longer dreading phone calls or surprise visits from the board. During this stretch, Lucy and Liam maintained their professional distance in public, but occasionally their paths would cross in a quiet corridor or late at night when most employees had gone home. In those moments, they shared updates, Liam revealing how certain board members were leaning in favor of R&D's growth, Lucy describing the positive feedback from potential clients. The lingering tension between them softened, replaced by a cautious fondness that neither needed to verbalize yet. One evening, as Lucy wrapped up a final email to the West Coast investors, she felt an unexpected surge of emotion. The memories of frantic budgeting, tearful anxieties over losing her job, and the desperate fear of failing her sister welled up. She realized how far they'd come from the brink. The department, once on the chopping block, was now attracting external interest. Emily's next medical bills would still be a burden, but at least Lucy had a stable job, one that might soon bloom into a genuine career opportunity. With a determined sigh, she gathered her laptop. Despite the weight of impending deadlines, she sensed a transformation stirring in her. She was no longer just an overworked assistant scrounging for stability. She was a driving force in a major corporate initiative. She felt stronger, more self-assured. Outside, the city sparkled under the night sky. Lucy lingered by the building's entrance, reflecting on the improbable journey that had started with a chance encounter at a restaurant. That single slip-up, sitting at the wrong table, had unleashed a cascade of events leading her to this moment. And despite every fear, heartbreak, and high-stakes conflict, she felt a new clarity. She was standing on the threshold of triumph, not just for Harrington Tech, but for her own sense of purpose. Lucy hurried through her apartment door one crisp Saturday morning, finding Emily seated at the small kitchen table, flipping through pages of a well-worn magazine. Sunlight streamed in through the windows, illuminating the cozy but modest living space they shared. Lucy could still feel the echoes of her hurried work week coursing through her system. Investor calls, final demos, and an endless parade of emails. But for a moment, as she inhaled the familiar scent of home, a wave of relief washed over her. "Hey," Emily said, glancing up with a smile that instantly made Lucy feel lighter. "You're back earlier than I expected." Lucy set her purse on a chair and shrugged off her coat. "I wanted to catch you before you left for your appointment," she replied, nodding toward the clock. "How are you feeling?" Emily brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. "Better, actually. The latest round of treatment seems to be helping. Dr. Rivera said my last test showed some improvement." Lucy's eyes lit up. "That's fantastic news." She grabbed a glass of water, then lowered herself into the chair opposite her sister. "So does that mean he might reduce the medication soon?" "It's possible," Emily said, hope flickering in her voice. "Though he's cautious, we'll see what the next tests reveal. But still, progress." Lucy reached for Emily's hand. She remembered the months of relentless anxiety, the mounting bills, and her own fear of losing the health insurance that kept Emily's treatments going. Now, with R&D temporarily secure and Emily's health showing signs of stability, Lucy felt the tiniest seed of optimism take root. "I'm so glad," she whispered. There was a comfortable silence before Emily tipped her head to the side, eyeing her sister curiously. "So, you're busy as ever at Harrington Tech, right? Does that mean no time for, well, you know?" Lucy raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "No time for what?" Emily chuckled. "A life outside of spreadsheets, maybe dating, that Mike guy, or whoever he really is." Heat flared in Lucy's cheeks. She told Emily the basics, that she went on a blind date, only to discover later he was actually her new CEO, Liam Harrison. But she'd avoided the most personal details, how genuine their connection felt, how they'd navigated the mess of office politics. "We haven't exactly been on a second date," Lucy admitted carefully. "There's too much at stake with work right now." Emily folded her arms, adopting a mock-serious expression. "I know you. Work can't always be your excuse. If there's something real there, you owe it to yourself to explore it when the time is right." Lucy sighed, tapping her fingers restlessly against the table. "He and we've decided to keep things professional for the moment. There's a lot riding on this AI project, especially with that 6-month window to prove our worth. We can't risk fueling rumors or undermining either of our positions." Emily tilted her head in understanding. That makes sense. Just don't let caution choke out something good. Her voice grew softer. I've seen how hard you work, Lucy. I also see how your face lights up whenever you talk about him. Lucy felt her pulse quicken at the gentle nudge. Emily, we barely talk about him. A knowing smile touched Emily's lips. You talk about him enough that I know you're interested. Before Lucy could respond, her phone buzzed on the table, an incoming call from Adam. Lucy held up a finger to Emily and answered, Adam, everything okay? Better than okay. Adam's enthusiastic voice crackled through the line. We just heard from the West Coast investors. They're ready to draft a formal partnership agreement for the AI pilot. Can you come in on Monday to help finalize the details? Lucy's heart soared. That's incredible news. Absolutely. I'll be there first thing. Hanging up, she noticed Emily grinning. I take it something good happened. Lucy nodded, feeling a sparkle of excitement. The investors want to move forward. This is the breakthrough we've been pushing for. She and Emily exchanged a look of shared relief. Maybe, just maybe, the path ahead wouldn't be paved with as many sleepless nights. As Lucy helped Emily gather her things for her appointment, a quiet realization sank in. Her old life, defined by constant crisis, was gradually shifting. The department at Harrington Tech had a fighting chance, and Emily's condition was seeing pockets of improvement. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it felt like an exhale after months of holding her breath. Walking Emily out to her waiting rideshare, Lucy reflected on how different their situations had been only a few months ago. She remembered the fear that overshadowed her every decision. What if she lost her job? How would she handle the medical bills? Would she have to uproot Emily and move back to the rural town they grew up in, scraping by on minimal resources? But now, as Chicago's early spring sunshine cut through the cold air, Lucy tasted the sweet promise of stability. She watched Emily climb into the back seat, smiling brightly as she waved. Lucy gave a small, heartfelt wave in return, thinking, we've come so far. Turning back toward the apartment, Lucy felt a flutter in her stomach. Maybe it was time to open the door to the part of her life she'd kept locked away, the part that dared to dream of love beyond practical concerns. She recalled Liam's steady gaze, the subtle warmth beneath his formal manner. For once, she let herself entertain the notion that, eventually, she could embrace more than just professional success. Perhaps that was the next step in a story still unfolding. Monday morning found Lucy stepping into Harrington Tech with uncharacteristic lightness in her stride. The typical swirl of employees rushing around the lobby seemed less frantic, less fraught with underlying tension. She flashed her ID badge, noticing a few colleagues offering friendly nods rather than the worried glances she'd grown used to. As she rode the elevator to her floor, she mentally reviewed the upcoming tasks, finalizing the investor agreement, coordinating a small press briefing about the pilot project, and ensuring that the R&D department's immediate needs were met. It was a heavy load, but she no longer felt the paralyzing fear of imminent collapse. They had a plan, investor interest, and a leadership team, Liam's team, that recognized the importance of innovation. Lucy's first stop was the break room for a quick coffee. She spotted Hannah by the coffee machine, humming softly under her breath. When Hannah saw Lucy, her face lit up. Did you hear about the pilot project timeline? They want to start initial testing in 6 weeks. Lucy poured her coffee and nodded eagerly. I saw the email early this morning. Are you okay with the accelerated data work? Hannah's eyes sparkled with confidence. Oh, it's a lot, but this kind of momentum is thrilling. My data team is ready. They clinked their paper cups in a silent toast, a small but significant gesture of shared excitement. Then Lucy made her way to her desk, powering on her computer to start responding to emails. Less than an hour later, Martin popped by with a grin. Got a second to swing by the main conference room. Adam's finalizing details with the investors, and we need your coordination expertise. She followed Martin down the hallway, noting how the atmosphere had shifted since the threat of layoffs had hovered over them. People walked with purpose, but also with a certain optimism. The conference room was abuzz with conversation when she entered, Adam conversing with two investor representatives via speakerphone and a handful of R&D staff leaning over charts on the table. "Lucy," Adam called, gesturing for her to join them. "We've hashed out most of the technical specs, but we need to confirm a timeline for the pilot's official launch event and align it with our marketing push." Lucy swept into the conversation, clarifying deadlines for the promotional materials, scheduling checkpoints for the AI's performance tests, and offering suggestions to ensure the investors' concerns about user adoption were addressed. Her planning instincts kicked in, and within an hour they had a coherent schedule that spanned the next 3 months. When the meeting wrapped, Adam let out a long breath, pushing aside a stack of papers. "Feels like we're finally in a position to thrive, not just survive." Lucy smiled in agreement. "Yes, but let's not let our guard down. We still have to prove ourselves at every stage." Adam chuckled. "True enough. But you know what's different now? We have the board's provisional support, at least most of them, and we've got Liam's backing." He paused, lowering his voice. "He's a good CEO, Lucy. He cares about the people here, not just the bottom line. That's rare." She nodded, a swirl of mixed emotions stirring in her chest. "I agree." On her way back to her desk, Lucy nearly collided with Esther, who was carrying a file of HR documents. The older woman stabilized her stack and gave Lucy a quick once-over. "Busy as ever, I see," Esther teased. "Heard you're orchestrating the pilot's launch. Exciting times ahead." Lucy offered a half laugh. "Definitely. It's still sinking in that we're not teetering on the edge of closure anymore." Esther's tone softened. "I'm truly glad. You deserve a moment to breathe and to realize how far you've come. You've been more than just an assistant through this. You've proven leadership qualities I'd like to see recognized." Lucy arched a curious brow. "What do you mean?" Esther handed her a form. "Martin, Adam and I have spoken informally. We'd like to propose a new role for you once the pilot is secured. Project coordinator for cross-departmental initiatives. It's a step up, with more responsibility, but also more compensation. Think about it." The folder felt heavier in Lucy's hands than the modest stack of papers might suggest. She scanned the preliminary job description, her heart thudding in her chest. A promotion. She'd always done her job with diligence, but she'd never expected an official move up the corporate ladder. "Esther, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Esther replied, smiling. "You've earned it!" Lucy felt a wave of amazement, her thoughts briefly flashing to Emily's medical bills and the relief an increased salary would bring. More than that, she realized it was an acknowledgement of her newfound confidence and capability, qualities she'd discovered within herself through crisis after crisis. She walked back to her desk in a daze, glancing around at the office that had once felt like a grueling battleground. Now it shimmered with fresh possibility. She thought of Liam and how his leadership and that accidental dinner had somehow set this entire series of events in motion. She breathed deeply, feeling the stirrings of gratitude and hope. The world of Harrington Tech wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was a space where she'd found her voice and opened her eyes to new horizons. Lucy's head spun with possibilities as she left work that evening, the city lights twinkling against a dusky sky. She'd stayed later than usual, crafting notes on her potential transition into a project coordinator role. Her nerves buzzed with both excitement and uncertainty. The change would mean stepping into uncharted territory, managing cross-departmental teams, shaping timelines, and acting as a liaison between executives and staff. She hopped on the train, scanning the faces around her. Business professionals, students, exhausted parents, and the occasional tourist all jostled in the crowded car. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks gave her space to reflect. Despite her exhaustion, her mind danced with the idea that she was no longer simply an overworked assistant. She had proven her competence, and people had taken notice. Back home, Emily was sprawled on the couch, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table. A mild red flush on her cheeks suggested she might be recovering from a headache, but she still beamed when Lucy walked in. "You look like you have news," Emily said, placing a puzzle piece with careful precision. Lucy set her bag aside and plopped down next to her sister. "There might be a new position opening for me at Harrington Tech, project coordinator. It's not official yet, but Esther gave me a heads up." Emily's eyes widened. "Lucy, that's amazing." She reached over and squeezed Lucy's hand, face lighting in encouragement. "You've been handling so much responsibility already. It's about time they acknowledged it." Lucy chuckled, leaning her head back against the couch. "Yeah, I guess. It's just surreal. Remember a few months ago, I was terrified I'd lose my job altogether." Emily's expression turned thoughtful. "I remember. And look how far you've come." She hesitated, fiddling with the edge of a puzzle piece. "So, is there any chance you'll celebrate this? Maybe actually go out for dinner with a certain someone?" Heat crept into Lucy's cheeks. "I'm not sure if that's the next step," she stammered. "We're still navigating a lot at work, especially with the pilot project." And Emily cut her off with a mischievous grin. "Lucy, you can't keep using 'we're busy' as your perpetual reason for staying on the sidelines. Maybe it's time you let yourself have a life outside Excel sheets and departmental budgets." Despite herself, Lucy laughed. "I'll think about it," she promised, nudging Emily's shoulder affectionately. "Right now, I just want to shower and crash." Over the next few days, Lucy did more than simply think about it. She noticed fleeting moments when she and Liam exchanged glances in the hallway or during team briefings. The pilot was in full swing, so their professional paths crossed frequently. He'd offer a small smile, a nod, and occasionally linger after a meeting to ask how she was handling the increased workload. Their interactions were cordial, respectful, and carefully monitored by them both. One afternoon, while finalizing a progress document in her cubicle, Lucy felt a presence at her shoulder. She turned, startled, to find Liam there, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He rarely visited her section of the floor, no doubt to avoid stirring gossip. "Hi," she said, straightening up. She fought a pang of self-consciousness as her co-workers kept their heads down but definitely noticed his arrival. He cleared his throat, shifting from foot to foot. "Would you mind if we spoke privately, maybe in the smaller break room on this floor?" Lucy nodded, saving her document and rising to follow him. Her heart pounded with an odd mix of anticipation and caution. The smaller break room was empty at this hour, aside from a half-depleted coffee pot and a vending machine humming in the corner. Liam turned to face her, expression serious. "I've heard rumors that you might be transitioning into a project coordinator role. I just wanted to say it's well-deserved. Your organizational skills have been crucial, and you've proven how vital you are to the company." Lucy felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. I still have a lot to learn, but it's exciting. Kind of scary, too." He offered a small, warm smile that softened the hard edge of his features. "Sometimes the best opportunities are the scariest ones, and you're definitely capable. If you have any questions or concerns about the position, please know my door is open." "Thanks," Lucy said quietly, fiddling with a stray paperclip in her pocket. She sensed an unspoken thought lingering just beneath his words. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow around them. For a moment, she recalled the golden glow of the restaurant where she'd first met Liam. How different everything felt then. Now, even in this mundane break room, she sensed the same gentle spark that had drawn them together. He hesitated, gaze flicking to the door as if to make sure no one was approaching. "There's one more thing," he began carefully. "I know we agreed on professional boundaries, but I don't want to pretend we aren't friends. Once this pilot is off the ground, maybe we could—" He paused, choosing his words. "We could talk outside the office. Catch up." "If that feels right." Lucy's pulse fluttered. Emily's recent advice echoed in her mind. She considered the swirl of responsibilities, but also the blossoming sense that she could allow herself something personal. "I'd like that," she finally managed, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He nodded, relief evident in his shoulders. "Good. Then let's plan on it. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to reconnect." They stood in silence for a few heartbeats, the hum of the vending machine and distant murmur of office chatter filling the background. Then, with a quiet smile, Liam excused himself. Lucy watched him go, a strange sense of ease settling over her. Maybe she really could juggle both, a flourishing role at work and the faint but persistent hope of a deeper connection. Returning to her desk, Lucy found herself brimming with ideas. How to streamline the pilot's rollout, how to tackle project coordinator responsibilities if and when they became official, and how to approach the slow burn of her feelings for Liam. She realized that she was no longer merely surviving each day. She was forging a path forward, collecting knowledge, and daring to share it. And in sharing, she found the capacity for something more. 2 months passed in a flurry of progress updates, investor negotiations, and departmental milestones. The AI pilot project at Harrington Tech took shape with remarkable speed, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose across the company. Lucy, newly titled Project Coordinator, found her days occupied by juggling schedules, resolving cross-team conflicts, and meticulously documenting every step of the pilot's development. For the first time, Lucy had her own small office, really just a converted storage space. But it had a door she could close when she needed focus or a brief moment to catch her breath. She decorated it with a single framed photo of Emily and a couple of motivational quotes pinned to the wall. Occasionally, she gazed at the photo, thinking about how far they both had come. Emily's health had continued to show slow, consistent improvement, allowing Lucy to exhale worry she'd held onto for years. Late one Friday afternoon, Lucy wrapped up a call with the West Coast investors, confirming a successful beta test. Her shoulders slumped in relief as she ended the Zoom session. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a moment, and felt the warm glow of accomplishment. A knock sounded at the door, and she opened her eyes to see Liam standing there, one hand resting lightly on the frame. He'd been careful not to visit her office too often, respecting the boundaries they'd agreed upon. But something about the relaxed set of his features suggested this might be a more casual stop. "Busy?" he asked gently. Lucy stood, a grin forming. "No, just finished a call." "Everything's on track for next week's demonstration." Liam stepped into the cramped office, eyes sweeping the space. "Looks good in here. Suits you." She laughed. "It's not exactly a corner suite, but I like having a space to think." She offered him the only chair besides her own, while she perched on the edge of her desk. They were close enough that she could catch a faint trace of his cologne. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to share some news with you. The board held a quick session this morning, unofficial really, but they're thrilled about the pilot's progress. Even Charles Whitmore had to admit we might be onto something big." Lucy's eyebrows shot up. "Charles admitted that." Liam chuckled, running a hand through his hair. In his own grudging way, yes, a few new potential clients have also inquired, so we're discussing expanding R&D's budget and possibly opening new positions to handle the interest. It's not final, but the outlook is promising. Lucy's heart fluttered with excitement. That's incredible, and it means we're in a much safer place than we were. He nodded, meeting her gaze. Definitely. You've been a huge part of that, Lucy. Keeping everything organized, fostering collaboration. Everyone sees it. I see it. His words carried a warmth that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, memories of that fateful blind date and their cautious agreement in the midst of corporate turmoil drifted between them. She felt the tension that lingered, the awareness that they'd never fully closed the door on personal possibilities. She took a breath. And you've been at the heart of steering the company in the right direction. I'm glad the board is finally recognizing your vision. A soft silence settled. Liam glanced at the photo of Emily on the desk, then back at Lucy. How's your sister doing? Stable, Lucy replied, a note of relief in her voice. Maybe even improving, if her next tests go well. We're hopeful. He nodded, as though he truly understood how significant that was. After a moment, he stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from his shirt. I won't keep you long. I just wanted to say that if you're free this weekend, maybe we could finally catch up. Outside of work, Lucy's heart gave a little leap. Their interactions had remained so carefully guarded for months. Now that the threat of layoffs had receded and her position was more secure, perhaps they could be honest about the connection that still lingered from that first night. I'd love that, she replied quietly, her lips curving into a small, genuine smile. Great, Liam breathed, relief flashing across his face. I'll text you, and we can figure out a place and time. They stepped to the door together, returning to the bustling hallway. A few co-workers passed by, offering polite smiles or nods, but no one lingered. Lucy felt a sense of quiet resolution as Liam turned to head toward the elevators. This time, there was no secrecy, no guilt in the fleeting glance they shared. It was simply two people acknowledging that at last the storm was passing. In the days that followed, Lucy's life seemed to settle into a steadier rhythm. Her new role challenged her in exciting ways, giving her a taste of leadership she'd once thought out of reach. Emily's health continued to hold steady, lessening the weight on Lucy's conscience, and in small, hopeful ways, she allowed herself to imagine a life that included not just professional success, but genuine companionship. When the weekend arrived, Lucy found herself standing outside a cozy Italian cafe near the Chicago River. She clutched her phone in one hand, scanning the passing faces for Liam's familiar features. A soft drizzle misted the evening air, reflecting city lights in the damp pavement. When she finally spotted him stepping out of a taxi, her heart surged. Not with the old fear of losing everything, but with anticipation for what might blossom if she finally let herself believe in more than survival. They exchanged smiles, and in that simple, wordless moment, Lucy felt a surge of gratitude for the strange, winding journey that had brought them here. She thought of the fateful night she'd walked into the wrong blind date, unaware that the man at the table would become so crucial to her life. Now, as she took a small step closer, she realized they were no longer bound by confusion or crisis. They had each weathered trials in both work and love and emerged on the other side with renewed strength. Inside the cafe, Liam held the door open for her. She glanced around at the warm glow and inviting aroma of freshly baked bread. A wave of warmth, of possibility, flooded her senses. She thought of Harrington Tech, of Emily, of the long road they'd all traveled, and she smiled. This was a new chapter, a gentle promise that sometimes even the darkest detours lead to places we never imagined, with people who make every challenge worth enduring. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.